Fallout is an engaging, at times harrowing, at other times frightening, almost always unscrupulous adventure that is a treat to experience for the first time, even in the current year. This is coming from a player whose interest for the series only peaked due to getting exposed to it because I had a subscription to Game Informer magazine. It also helped having a friend whose older brother was old enough to purchase Fallout 3, and nice enough to retrieve and deliver the game to me at cost. Before I ever learned about save scumming, well before I ever had to solve virtual trolley paradoxes, and a few years before I would win an art contest for a print I made that was ever so creatively titled, War Never Changes, my first ever exposure to the Fallout series was Fallout 3. I enjoyed what I played with Fallout 3, but Fallout New Vegas is where that joy took flight. Reading articles during its production, what fascinated me most about Fallout New Vegas, at the time, was how the game's development would be led by Obsidian, a developer created from the ashes of Interplay's Black Isle Studios division, the development house that produced the Fallout series' first two titles. Fast forward twice my age then, and I've heard throughout the years that the first Fallout is still considered by some to be one of the best in the series. This video will delve into that wasteland. Lately, my videos have adopted a game development focal point, and this video is no different. But, seeing as there's already an abundance of media out there covering the topic, you can always check out that plethora of information by performing a cursory search on a growing library of interviews with producer Tim Cain and art director Leonard Boyarsky. Or you can take a look at Tim Cain's YouTube channel to give you the deeper insight that you seek. I'll also link some of the findings in this video's description to give you some launchpads. The abrupt explanation is that Fallout's development was a flash in the pan, but here's the Cliff Notes summary. The Roman philosopher Seneca once said that luck was when preparation and opportunity met each other. In that sense, you could say that the production of Fallout was incredibly lucky. When you hear the story of how it came about, it almost does feel like dumb luck. The kind of luck where reality blesses you with the precise amount of circumstance to meet your preparation at the crossroads of destiny, almost as if assigned from a spiritual entity on a higher plane of existence. In early 1994, Tim Cain knew that he wanted to make his own game, just as Interplay was in the market to obtain a license for a new intellectual property. Among these licenses was the generic universal role-playing system, known as GURPS for short. What was special about GURPS was that Tim already had his foot in the door surrounding its license's acquisition, having built the GURPS star system generator back in 1991. In 1993, Cain received permission to publish his star system generator from the creator of GURPS, Steve Jackson, establishing his rapport with Steve's company. So, when the question, which game license should we acquire and why, was asked by Interplay's leadership, of course, Cain perked up and responded that he wanted to make a GURPS game. Using his established connection with Steve Jackson as leverage, Tim was able to get the company to sign on for his dream developer-publisher partnership, contingent that he took full responsibility for getting his project going without using company resources. In layman's terms, this meant making a game from scratch without pulling anyone actively working on another project, which meant literally everyone he worked with. A less optimistic individual would call this practically impossible. Normally, they would be right. This was practically impossible. For anyone who wasn't named Tim Cain, it would be the first and only time Cain would ever have the title of producer next to his name on the credits for a game. You see, Tim had already formulated a plan to make his own game months in advance before ever proposing that Interplay obtained a GURPS license. When he was between the production of the game Rags to Riches, Cain was tasked with making installers for all accessible formats for Interplay games. It was high-level busy work. Necessary tasks that kept you occupied between more pressing jobs. In a bold move that walked the tightrope between rule follower and insubordinate, Cain made a compiler that was able to make the installers for him. He took full advantage of the newly created free time by making 3 separate game engines: a 2D sprite engine, a 3D engine, and a voxel engine. So, when Tim was tasked with making the impossible possible, that is, making a GURPS licensed game out of thin air, he already had the software variable of that equation solved for, and now it was just a matter of finding the manpower while off of the company's dime. As any resourceful leader would do, Tim Cain sent out a mass email paraphrased as, "Hey, who wants to eat pizza at 6 o'clock and discuss making a game over in conference room 3? It's fitting that Fallout was Interplay's debut of their new logo, accompanied by the phrase "by gamers, for gamers," because the team that made Fallout also made this logo, using the learned philosophy that it was better to ask for forgiveness than permission. And well, the bigwigs at Interplay obviously forgave them. Described by Tim as having a clubhouse atmosphere, Interplay always had someone, if not a group of people, nerding out in the offices after hours. Sometimes you'd find guys up to something at 2 in the morning. The office space accommodated extracurricular activities, such as matches of racquetball, coworkers getting together to watch a movie, or, like Tim and his future teammates, groups would sometimes spend copious amounts of time on Thursday evenings, dubbed the Thursday night thing, where they would roleplay, roll dice, and yell like madmen, usually at the same time. Of course, the guy who built a GURPS star system generator, a compiler, and 3 separate game engines in his spare time is going to be a figurehead in a setting like that. As a guy who graduated from Dungeons & Dragons to GURPS, Cain did not have any trouble amassing any veterans and neophytes alike to the GURPS rule set. As a fellow tabletop hobbyist, Cain was friendly. As a game master, he exuded funkle energy. As a creative architect, he had already designed character builders to facilitate campaigns. He also didn't shy from keeping everyone organized in general by keeping the Thursday Night Thing mass email thread updated. So, when Tim Cain had spent week after week with a lot of these guys, and he sent out his pizza party invitation, he expected to see at least 15 to 16 guys. Depending on which interview you listened to, about 5 to 8 guys showed up, and less than half of the 6 pizzas were eaten. Though the pizza was hardly touched, these 5 to 8 guys were starving to make a game, and they quickly got to work brainstorming. Out of everyone who was there that night, regardless of when they departed from the project that would become Fallout, you can find all of these individuals within the game's manual, under the designer credits. From that night forward, everyone at that pizza party would be known as Team GURPS. Shortly after this meeting, Tim was reprimanded for organizing this soiree, until he reminded his supervisor that the meeting had occurred on neither Interplay's budget nor its time. So these corporately great pizza meetings would continue after regular working hours for weeks, until Tim officially acquired Jason's Taylor and Anderson at almost the same time. This was eventually followed by everyone else, including important team members such as Leonard Boyarsky and Scott Campbell. The team grew slowly in number, accumulating the organizational resources of a project worth taking seriously. Make no mistake, a lot of detail has been left out, so we'll just have to put a pin in the particulars for now. But the legend about the team that made this game fascinates the heck out of me. And that fascination is going to fuel me when I decide to discover where guys like Tim Cain and Leonard Boyarsky, and their friends alike, end up. The way I've heard it, as a project, Fallout as we know it could have officially failed to launch more than 4 times. Although it's more than 4 times if you consider the incident when Tim Cain almost left Interplay once he found out he was being severely underpaid for his role. The default perspective surrounding Fallout's development was that Interplay viewed the game's production as a B project. Interplay had a Dungeons & Dragons license, which may as well have been a license to print money. So a GURPS licensed game was not as favored, and everything from establishing a creative foothold to getting the game finally developed and published in working order was an uphill battle. When Fallout eventually found its backing from Interplay's higher-ups, there was pressure to make it similar to Diablo, due to the game's wide acclaim. Tim has recalled being constantly pestered by Interplay executives who tried to make this happen. Discovering that pushback would not end the Diablo madness, he utilized some reductio ad absurdum. That is to say, he followed this outcome logically toward its absurdity. He faked a smile and agreed to make a Diablo-formatted game. Then, he mentioned the budget, time, and effort necessary to achieve such a ridiculous demand. And the Diablo meetings ended right then and there, never to be brought up again. The third time Fallout could have failed was during March of 1997, or 6 months before the game was published. Due to the game's more violent and adult themes, Steve Jackson made a visit to Interplay to demand corrective creative changes, at the threat of pulling his license. After being passed the meeting availability buck from both executive Brian Fargo and Tim's direct supervisor, Fergus Urquhart, Tim entered into a 6-hour-long deliberation with Steve Jackson, ending with Fallout's abandonment of the license. This would have been a death sentence for any other game, but luckily, Tim had designed Fallout's engine in a modular fashion, which allowed for tweaks to remove anything GURPS related without having to build a completely new game. We'll talk about Fallout's 4th horseman of the apocalypse in more detail later. Despite all of its setbacks, despite unexpected departures from crucial team members, the cascading issues that needed resolving, the never-ending battle of Team GURPS having to prove its worth to the company brass, Interplay displaying its fair-weather reception to Fallout's success, or the abandonment of the GURPS license. Despite that entire maelstrom, Fallout still succeeded. It succeeded because that group of 5 to 8 guys who showed up to that one quasi-troublesome pizza party unknowingly self-selected themselves to put in the work required to make a project that ran on the fumes of burnt midnight oil. That very same team of guys self-exploited themselves frequently. And near the end of Fallout's production, almost always, usually working till sunrise because they knew that being able to make a game during the years of 1994 to 1997 with the little to no company oversight that they received was a blue moon of an opportunity in the industry. Before we continue, I'd like to point something out. In the realm of creativity, there are gardeners and there are architects. Architects plan their creations like any building. They find a foundation, craft a schema, and fill it with a robust frame well before ever deciding to flourish their project's elevation. The gardener, on the other hand, grows their creation as it takes them, because they fly by the seat of their pants and can just wing it a lot of the time. I heard a quote from David Lynch about how creativity is like being a chef. We don't make the fish, but we catch the fish. We fillet it, season it, prepare it, cook it at a proper temperature with just the right amount of flavors, and we serve it to others for nourishment and enrichment. Ideas work similarly. The thought comes to us. We catch it in our hearts and minds, but, writing things down never hurts. So we capture that idea onto a notepad, and we marinate that thought until it's ready to be shared with the world through various methods of production. The best outcome to a situation like this would be that the artist, their art, and its audience all leave for home to proverbially rest up near a hearth fat with inspiration. As someone who leans gardener myself, what a poetic way to describe the creative process for the gardener. And I can't believe that all just kind of came to me in the moment. On the flip side, where do I go from here? As a game developer, Tim Cain is through and through an architect. He still documents a furious amount of notes all of these decades later. During development, he pummeled his team to make a plan for their game, and then he told them to stick to it. This is why there's an easily accessible vision statement for Fallout. You can also find that linked in the description below. But Cain's leadership style as Fallout's producer was collaborative. It still is. His design preference was, and still is, that fun trumps everything. Tim's ego usually didn't get in the way of the authority of having the final say on creative decisions, and when he utilized his final word, it was to settle disputes the way a parent hands out stern words. If his team couldn't settle their creative differences, Cain would threaten to program the least complex design choice. That may be the only documented conflict resolution I've ever encountered, but it's also the best. A guy like Tim Cain is a guy you'd be lucky to have in any organization. This is all to say that the robust planning for Fallout allowed for implementation that bursted with green thumbery, and an execution that bloomed. The Vault Boy, for example, was realized under horticultural circumstances. When Team GURPS was trying to make the character creation screen for the game, they noticed that it all looked boring. And boy howdy, if it looks boring, it's going to feel boring. So Leonard Boyarsky drafted up a mascot for Vault Tech, basing the character's look and ubiquity off of the Monopoly Man. You can't see it as much on the first draft, but Leonard was able to pass the design off to Tramel Ray Isaac, who then refined what would become Vault Boy, giving players a memorable character builder, and the series its easily recognizable icon. Vault Boy's brand recognition only seems to be going up these days, and this is just one of the many examples of Fallout's developers doing the most gardener shit ever. Fallout begins with a whimper and not a bang. The bang already happened a lifetime ago, some 85 or so years to be approximate. But its repercussions can still be felt. As the TV pans out to show its fore and backgrounds, a black and white war effort ad is playing intermingled with glints and glitters that everyone could seemingly afford on the brink of total annihilation. At least, that's what a nation living in a world on the brink of total annihilation would want you to believe. It would distract you from the brutality of its reality, as if the poor Canadian who got executed not even 10 seconds ago wasn't being used to sell war bonds. I had seen this cutscene before back in high school, although it didn't impact me nearly as much as it did sitting here and playing this game for the first time. Having noise-canceling headphones probably helped, sure, but the profundity of the scene lies in its effortless subversion of what's playing on the television with the long-term consequences of the ideologies that the TV's images convey. Progress, a long-term methodology, provided a permanent short-term solution to its resource-scarce, war-induced world. Paired with the melancholy tone of the song Maybe, performed by the Inkspots, makes this scene all the more chilling. Eventually, the word maybe suddenly record skips before disappearing alongside the TV's feed, turning a lyric into an epitaph for a society that existed mere seconds ago. The echoing death cry lingers in the mind long after the song stops playing, as the harsh wind replaces the song and the view pans slowly, and then, suddenly, from past to present. Collectively speaking, this intro has lingered in some minds for nearly 28 years and counting. This opening cinematic is the punchline to a sick joke, like the apocalypse murdered retrofuturism execution style, now wearing its skinned face as a mask as it taunts the player. What a relief to not be in real physical captivity by an actual sicko. Although, what a wild ride my imagination just took me on during those last 90 seconds. What sort of horrors is this world gonna put us through? How many scars will we end up with trying to escape its clutches? And most importantly, how will we ever survive it all? The funny thing about jokes is that deep down inside of each joke is a kernel of truth. Ron Perlman enters the audio to fill us in on the rest of Fallout's setting. The desperation of the world's last resources, the rising tensions with powerful nations like China, the invasion of Alaska, the annexation of Canada, the exploitation guiding all of this, and the Armageddon that some of these significant details led to. It all doesn't feel outside of the realm of possibility for our own future. The society being painted here has a lot of striking color. How desensitized to violence does a culture have to be if the execution of another person can be sold as a war bond? It's jarring to see. Even more alarming is how easily I can visualize our own reality, arriving at a similar outcome, given the plausible variables. Art director Leonard Boyarsky stated that his intent to use the song Maybe acted as a sort of foreshadowing to the ending that he ultimately fought to be put in the game. You hear the same song in the game's final cutscene as the Vault Dweller walks away. A nice ribbon tied to the gift that is Fallout on a first playthrough. Maybe is a song that hammers home the finality of the game's ending. To me, the song feels like a nudge toward what's in store for the player. The word maybe serves as a suggestion of what the player will get into, just as much as it provokes contemplation about what's already transpired. You know, revelations lowercase after the revelations capital R. Given the time I've spent listening to Tim Cain, what speaks loudest to me is that eerie feeling as the TV blips out and the word echoes over and over until it fades, only for the sound of howling wind to replace it. All of that curious optimism that retrofuturism peaked, now well extinguished by the reality which some of its more deadly ideas usher. Maybe this is how the world ended. Maybe this is how our world eventually ends. Maybe fortune will about face for someone in this desolate new world that seems to be sorely lacking it. As a first-time player, maybe the game will have all sorts of bleak, low fantasy, high science fiction hoops it wants me to jump through. Maybe I'll be tasked with saving a person or persons from a terror that can only be truly known when it's standing right in front of me. And maybe I'll learn what exactly that is during my time spent with the game. Maybe I won't. Maybe. Of course, I'm writing all of this retroactively, but proactively, I went into this experience knowing that war never changes and that morality, although contrasted by black outlines and white imagery, is mostly gray. All of this philosophy is getting in the way of what's really important. The TV's unplugged. Let's talk about the guy who made that creative decision. Leonard Boyarsky's an interesting guy. At the time of Fallout's inception, Boyarsky's writing the years-long live wire of, well, getting paid for art is better than being a freelance artist, only to fall into the game's art director role and rise well above the occasion. Tim Cain had a similar happenstance spring upon him when his boss, and the game's producer at the time, Thomas Dekker, had to leave to manage around 22 other projects simultaneously. True to the spirit of Team GURPS, Leonard was self-taught on SGI Workstation from some late-night, self-inflicted crash courses, tinkering away at 3D modeling when he wasn't nose-first in the system's manual. Of course, he fostered other skills involving design that I'll leave as an unanswered mystery for now. But Leonard, like most of Team GURPS, was resourceful. Notably, he wasn't too good at making industrial concept art. For Fallout's water chip alert segments, Boyarsky recruited then Sharon Shellman, now Sharon Anderson, Jason's wife, as well as Tony Postma. Postma was particularly proficient at making concept art involving anything that looked like it came from or could produce an assembly line, while Shellman had a knack for 3D graphics. After Fallout, Shellman went on to work on the cinematic scenes found in StarCraft's Brood War expansion, while working at Blizzard Entertainment, which were specifically impressionable toward a younger me. In addition to several monsters and creature animations, models such as Mr. Handy, the robot we indirectly meet at Fallout's opening sequence, Best Boy Dogmeat, the two-headed Brahmin, and the mascot of most situations unholy, the Deathclaw. Sharon also brought other Postma concept art to life, making the mutant vat scenes involved in one of the game's more gruesome endings. I could spend at least a paragraph discussing the scene where the mutants dip the Vault Dweller in the vats, so, gardener that I am, I think I will. Serpentine perspective navigates toward your player character wiggling under bandages aplenty. Without really giving it away, you have to choose this caterpillared outcome either out of desire, curiosity, or because you got defeated. Regardless of the journeys, the destination communicates regret, as super mutants toss a writhing, mummified Vault Dweller top-down perspective, cutting to the player character's face, only to cut to a taller view as the Vault Dweller raindrops into a vat of goop. Your character's hand reaches up out of desperation to try and undo what was already done from the start of the cutscene, rapidly growing legions as it expands, the ripples matching the high-pitched frequency associated with your doom, until the hand limps to a sudden black screen, and the music reverbs as it fades. That's some excellent cinematography given all the restrictions. Hiding the appearance of the Vault Dweller to convey the player's individuality, and having just the hand stick out when the transmogrification begins, is such an excellent way to make a scene, while also saving the art team a ton of extra work of having to fully variate and animate the entire scene several times over. The end result becomes a grotesque rebirth, made to look like the funeral of your playthrough. Where Leonard Boyarsky's resourcefulness shines most brightly for me is in his ability to refine Anthony Postma's concept art as signpostage for Fallout's overworld map locations. Junktown has its Route 66 postcard typeface, making it look like it was found in a souvenir shop along the once prominent byway. My favorite map art belongs to the Brotherhood of Steel, depicting its decorative cherubs rocking high-tech weaponry while outlining the medieval-looking blueprint of the faction's headquarters. And that King James biblical calligraphy, paired with the Gothic Chomsky-looking font, really knocks it out of the park, with the entire divine righteousness vibe the Brotherhood broadcasts throughout the Fallout series. But the best piece of map art has to be the Vault 13 layout, which features like an ad, showcasing a trisected mountain vault's interior schematics. A married couple is standing at the end of a long line, waiting to enter the vault. The way the two look happily toward a horizon we can't see, atom bombs raining behind them, as they wait patiently to enter their tomb, both earlier than most and while still alive, and yet excitedly, almost as if their optimism will get them inside the vault in time. It's all perfectly juxtapositionally eerie. For this piece, Leonard Boyarsky tweaked Anthony Postma's design only a little, making the man's smile less gummy, his tie red with certainty, and his wife the epitome of any contemporary advertisement featuring a flight stewardess. Boyarsky also added a slogan with a gradient and typography reminiscent of Back to the Future. He folded that tuned-up concept art like a museum pamphlet, creasing it to look dog-eared. The best flourish that he added to the vault art was giving it its sepia tone, that somehow, just like the married couple with their ad plot armor, shouts a remarkably uncanny valley feeling as you realize that all of this cheerfulness was eradicated by fire a lifetime ago. How was such a scorched look made for this art? Are you ready for this bombshell? Leonard poured coffee on it and sunbaked it in his car's dashboard for about 24 hours before scanning it into Fallout. Unlike Tim Cain, Leonard retained a darker outlook on life, but this was his ace in the hole for Fallout's grand vision. His perspective could be used to foil Tim's optimism, forming the opposite end of the Team GURPS design continuum. This was beneficial for many reasons, but a significant reason was that it allowed for healthy disagreement, which Team GURPS was able to distill into better realized design concepts for Fallout. Specifically, Leonard's yin to Tim's yang culminated in an ending that people are still talking about today, and all because Leonard realized that he could accomplish a much more impactful ending by essentially doing way less work. I'm careful not to label Leonard's perspective as pessimism. If anything, I'd call it more of a realistic outlook. But for Fallout's ending, Tim Cain originally wanted Vault 13 to throw a party for the Vault Dweller. Imagine a birthday-esque celebration with cake, confetti, and a crowd. A scene that could be made more easily today than back in the mid to late 90s. Inspired by the potential misery involved in accomplishing such a Herculean dream, Leonard argued that the paint job didn't match the vehicle of the game's story. This was going to be the ending for Fallout, a post-apocalyptic game mired with misfortune, mayhem, and mutants alike. Throwing a party for the Vault Dweller didn't match its thematic intent, so Boyarsky pitched a different conclusion for the game, one involving a hero who, having saved the Wasteland, was ostracized for his deeds rather than celebrated. We're still talking about that ending, all because Leonard fought for it, and because Tim never considered himself infallible. Fallout's development was patchworked by a number of instances like these, involving compromise. I fully admit I probably never would have noticed the unplugged TV, had I not heard Leonard talking about it during an informal discussion that I found while researching this video. And I think that speaks to one of the game's greatest strengths, immersion. Not noticing the unplugged TV was how immersed I was experiencing Fallout's introductory cutscene. This is where the game establishes its baseline for keeping you engaged, and the only direction to go is up. Lending to all of that immersion are both Fallout's music and talking heads. The talking heads were another suggestion by Boyarsky, who wanted to try something new and engrossing for video games, instead of maintaining the standard of static character portraits. Originally planned as around 40 and eventually landing at a solid 21 in number, the clay heads provided further engrossment into the player's experience as the Vault Dweller. First, the heads were sculpted. They were then scanned into the digital realm using a Pharaoh arm, refined and textured in Lightwave 3D in Photoshop, and then animated frame by frame to lip-sync the voice acting. Fallout's voice acting is arguably the best you can find for a video game made in 1997, let alone the latter half of the 90s. If a voice actor from Fallout didn't continue toward a more mainstream prominence on the big screen and/or television, they certainly continued to secure more and more prominent roles within the medium. From the Hollywood side, there's CCH Pounder. Keith David, Richard Dean Anderson, who you might know from MacGyver.
We don't need anybody. Maybe a little cheap labor, a few good machines.
I fought this jungle back. And my Indians are paid well for their work, MacGyver.
Power of the American dollar.
Depending on the year you were born. Clancy Brown, who I certainly know from SpongeBob to Jack 2 to like 20 other pieces of media, but endearingly, Highlander.
I have something to say. It's better to burn out than to fade away.
Ron Perlman seems pretty self-explanatory. And would you know that he got paid $40 in a sandwich to record his voice line? And Tony Shalhoub, who I cannot unsee as Abe Weissman from Marvelous Mrs. Maisel.
But at the very least, you will be embarrassed that you got punched in the nose by a not strong mathematician.
Within the realm of voice acting fame, Jim Cummings and Tress MacNeille proved themselves to be masters of their craft. With Cummings playing the 3 roles of Gizmo, Set, and Fallout's main antagonist, the Master. Pretty neat to learn that my favorite character from Winnie the Pooh and one of my least favorite characters from Mickey Mouse are all the same guy playing 3 separate villains in Fallout. Tress MacNeille only has 1 voice credit for this game, but you'd probably recognize her from a bonkers amount of roles, including her familiar hag voice from shows like The Simpsons or Futurama. That voice expresses no differently here.
Why do you disturb an elder of the cathedral?
For Fallout's music, Tim Kaine sent samples from artists such as Depeche Mode, Brian Eno, and Aphex Twin to Fallout's producer, Mark Morgan, to reference with the guidelines of providing a dark and ambient mood. What we got was, well, it was exactly that. Actually, I'm pretty sure Mark Morgan only ever listened to Aphex Twin's dark ambient mix, and just said, alright, challenge accepted. The music complements what I said earlier about Fallout being akin to the apocalypse wearing the face of retrofuturism after murdering it. Staying on brand, the music of Fallout is our Psycho Killer's theme song. My introduction to the music of the Fallout series was at times ironic and at other times optimistic. Almost always, it was thematic. Listening to a song like Marty Robbins' Big Iron while engaging in combat with placeholder goons in the Mojave Desert feels like a play on the Western Shootout. I can even remember the first time that Fallout's music really clicked for me. It was in the Smithsonian Museum of Fallout 3, where the player has to encounter facefuls of rockets and other machinery that reduces a character to no longer recognizable, while encountering a scary amount of mutants. The song? Roy Brown's Butcher Pete. All of these examples retain the same serendipity of Fallout's music at each of its in-game locations. I just happened to be at the right place while listening to these songs at the right time. But the only overlap that the songs of the newer Fallout games share with Fallout would be during its intro with the song Maybe. Even then, I feel that making such a declaration is pushing it, given how I've described the song. Put plainly, the music from any Fallout game made after Fallout 3 skews toward a tone that is still ironic, yet more optimistic and more idyllic. Like it's allowed to have a lot more whimsy to balance out its melancholic reality, whereas the music found in the first Fallout is downright haunting. It's ironic, yet it marches more brutalist. And there is no whimsy. Whimsy died a long time ago, alongside everything else. The Fallout series has always drawn its ironic imagery and later its whimsical sounds from retrofuturism. Retrofuturism aims to provide a glance at the future through rose-colored glasses. Who cares what it takes to get that combat train in the air? It's a flying train. The picture phone certainly landed the dynamic, even if the technology was exaggerated. I really just wanted to include this one because I like Ray Bradbury, but even killing the king of the dinosaurs is possible, with a time machine and a few high-powered rifles. Retrofuturism takes the relationship that humanity has with technology, a relationship that can be both alienating and empowering, and it makes it familiar. As a concept, it makes that dynamic feel as if it's within reach, in such a way that the fantastical imagery signifies our eventual technological mastery. The music of Fallout, just like with the unplugged TV in the dilapidated living room, gives an overwhelmingly sardonic response to that optimism, reducing it to a hopeless pile of rubble. If there were any life able to crawl out from the rubble, it would be met with a future that truly never was, a nightmare barely recognizable from the dream it started as. I'm no expert when it comes to music theory or instruments, but I don't need to hazard a guess in order to confidently state that no traditional instruments were used during Fallout's sound production. Brief research confirms this. Mark Morgan utilized the Synclavier synthesizer, sample CDs, vintage electronic keyboards, and even samples from movies like John Carpenter's Prince of Darkness or television shows such as X-Files. I've seen neither of those pieces of media, but maybe they mean something to you. And hopefully, what I have playing on the screen right now is a token of my consolation. Mark Morgan then used bit-crushing effects to nurture sounds that feel like they're worn down by time. This can all be heard in Fallout's first playable 30 seconds with the first song, Vault of the Future. Like a specter, the song echoes sounds of progress. Bellows belonging to a steel mill operate as the song's percussion. Concurrently, a melody with the cadence of first responder vehicle lights loop before, in front of, and behind the ears, about as predictably as a metropolitan street corner in St. Louis. Around a minute into the song, a stream of typing can be heard that could be placed serendipitously into whatever scenario you can imagine involving the act. A government employee smoking a cigarette while forecasting missile trajectory in a situation room. Two officials with higher security clearance than that employee sending encrypted messages to each other back and forth. The president en route to Denver Airport's not-so-secret subterranean panic fortress typing a sequence of alphanumeric codes into the nuclear football. Similarly, this song's distorted intercom voice that sounds like the scariest adult you've ever heard from an episode of Charlie Brown can make you drum up whatever situation sounds appropriate for its radio frequency. No matter the scenario, this all sounds plausible. It allows Vault of the Future to phonically arrive at both the right place at the right time in the imagination of the player, distilling these separate sounds, these phonics, into a history that sounds like a perverse harmony. The Brotherhood of Steel's theme, aptly titled Metallic Monks, tells us its harmonious story by way of Gregorian chant, an emergency siren that revolves toward and away from the ears in a circular motion, and a radiostatic signal which stands in for a sonar navigational system. Halfway through the song, a snare marches. I interpret this tune as the Brotherhood's manifest destiny. Considering how well the sounds I've described line up perfectly with the faction's history. On October 10th, 2077, due to a rising tension from being denied answers about the United States government's top-secret research involving a bioweapon known as the Forced Evolutionary Virus, Captain Roger Maxon staged a coup at the Mariposa military base. Once he heard that the virus was being used both in human trials and on POWs, Maxon killed lead researcher Robert Anderson, as well as his assistants. Mid-mutiny, Maxon's superior in command, Colonel Robert Spindle, had a mental breakdown and ended his own life. 10 days after the start of the madness, Maxon announced over an army broadcast that he and his men would be seceding from the United States. This was met with silence. 3 days later, the world ended in a matter of 2 hours, while the Mariposa military base remained unharmed. After gathering what technology, device schematics, and necessary supplies they could, Maxon, his men, and their families fled the atrocities of Mariposa to a large military bunker located in the Lost Hills, in what would be later known internally as the Exodus. Recounted in a rhyme scripture that probably doesn't look all too different from a scroll depicting cherubs wielding BFGs, the researchers lied, 2 Roberts died, the world fried, and from the ashes, Roger Maxon emerged a savior to his followers bona fide. Roger Maxon became the Moses figure to his flock. His actions, both before, during, and after the end of the world, became deified. The non-action that occurred during the indiscriminate nuclear exchange to both the Mariposa military base and the Lost Hills bunker following Maxon's secession became his 10th plague of Egypt. The journey from Mariposa to Lost Hills, mostly radiation-free, became his parting of the Red Sea. The Brotherhood of Steel was born from this fiery baptism, embodying an organization whose ancestry is entirely militaristic, seditious, and wary of power in the wrong hands. And what is technology in a post-apocalypse, if not a tool that confers power instantly? So, the existing technology must be preserved. The new technology must be hoarded. Anyone untrustworthy is to be alienated. Anyone who is trusted should be empowered. Gregorian chant, a siren that sounds like a lighthouse looks on a foggy night, and a degraded pitch, echolocating for a long percussion as time marches forward, all culminating in a sound that searches. What's amazing to me is that we can describe music like this in the first place. The industrial and technical noises found in both Vault of the Future and Metallic Monks belong to a glory that rings faded yet true, providing an atmosphere to the macabre navigated throughout Fallout. It doesn't get more atmospheric than Necropolis' City of the Dead. A first-time player will most likely encounter Necropolis after it's been ransacked, which serves to only heighten its sense of danger. Knowing how to approach Necropolis doesn't diminish the feeling of constant threat as you navigate its seedy underbelly. This is largely guided by a sound that never stops rising, which creates an unrelenting tension. It's meant to sonically invoke as much stress as it can, and it should. given how events play out in the City of the Dead. Also engaging were a litany of design choices. Fallout has a full-time widget menu, which not only allows for a seamless transition between the more active exploratory phase and the reactive turn-based battle system, it also lends to a smaller screen size, giving the game its buttery 60 frame per second resolution. As you walk around the Wasteland, NPCs will engage you with floating texts. Some of these texts will appear alongside each other, conveying a realistic sense of time passing. The game's animations are a feast for the eyes. From this guy's exaggerated running, to this lady walking like a character from 90s Batman cartoons, to these guys blowing up like blood sausages. Actually, there are quite a lot of things blowing up like blood sausages. I'd reckon all of the animation is damn good, given that no one on the development team had any experience in animation prior to working on Fallout. There's vacuum tubes littered somewhere in almost every interface, almost as if they're trying to sell you on the idea of, hey, if repeated design can outlast the atomic spray and pray of 2077, well maybe you can outlast the whims of the unforgiving child it gave birth to. I think my favorite menu design flourish has got to be the missing button from the Z key menu. Creatively, it feels like a feature that was never quite finished. I'm convinced that the missing button was some sort of navigational or traveling log feature that was available in the game's earlier stages, until maybe the development team decided it would be more fun to level the playing field between Vault Dweller and Medium Wastelander by removing the feature entirely. But the button keeps well with the theme of resourcefulness, despite the desolation. The inciting event of Fallout is that Vault 13, one of the many underground vaults built to withstand an Armageddon and sustain humanity, has a malfunctioning water chip that needs to be replaced in the next 150 days. As the resident of Vault 13 who drew the shortest straw, you, the Vault Dweller, are tasked by the Overseer to go out and find a replacement water chip with only one lead, Vault 15 to the east. Some time ago, this vault lost all known contact. And that's about all we know at the game's outset. The only world you have ever known may have survived the actual world being on fire, but now its pipes are leaking, and you're trying to prevent its basement from flooding before more people burn. When played for the first time, Fallout is a survival RPG, but also, in a lot of ways, it has its own brand of survivorship. The world map excels at making the player feel small, only enhancing that miniaturized feeling whenever the Vault Dweller has a random encounter. Those encounters can vary from mundane to benign, just as easily as they can oscillate between a massacre involving you or your foes as the victims. In Fallout, you don't go to the shop to buy the antidote. You travel to the cave to defeat the mutated Emperor Scorpion, to collect its venom sac, to then travel back to town, all the while consuming precious time to bring that venom back to the residential doctor to make the antidote, which consumes more time, but also grants the player experience that matters. The cave-to-clinic antidote makes you its procurer and its supply chain, at the risk of your resources. Outside of getting that anti-venom made and into a sick man, the antidote doesn't do anything. For some players. For other players, it's a chance to make a quick turnaround for the Vault Dweller's purchasing power. In a more traditional RPG, you almost always grind enemies to level up throughout the base game. In Fallout, the enemies' experience points are fixed, and learning has the highest growth potential. In a survival RPG, your family member dies from dysentery. In Fallout, your buddy from the last 22 hours of your playthrough gets immolated by freak shows, and his dying screams get written about, haunting your dreams for the rest of your life in the lore section of the sequel's manual. In a survival RPG, poison poisons you and must be treated. In Fallout, addiction is the true debuff, with its own traditional poison effect that only in-game time can heal. And boy, was navigating an ancient tomb filled with sleeping and recently reanimated death traps while low on resources just about the least perfect way to find that out. Similarly, the irradiated status acts like a curse that only knows the in-game day and the in-game hour of your departure from this life if you can't find a way to prevent or ameliorate it. We could go on all day, but in Fallout, we don't have all day. Always top of mind is Fallout's time limit. To the unsuspecting, 150 days can seem like a lot of wiggle room, and for a seasoned player, it is. But what about someone who's unseasoned? To the uninitiated, Fallout's time limit is like a pot of freshly dipped, desiccated noodles on the back burner. The player must focus on the more pressing needs from what's currently being sautéed, reduced, zested, or stirred, while making sure that all of that steadily rising heat doesn't cause all of that starchy water in the back to boil over. Of course, the 150-day deadline expects efficiency from a first-time player, in such a fashion that there really isn't a way to get everything right on the first try. The player can never truly be prepared for the ingredients or techniques that they epiphanied mid-stash. A first-time Vault Dweller has to grow alongside the garden laid both bare and barren before them, and that's going to take some beating. A lot of beatings. Without practice, an overoccupied stovetop is bound to end up underprepared. Sacrifices have to be made if you want the pasta al dente. A lot of times, those sacrifices boil down to mistakes you didn't know you made. In Fallout, mistakes in travel time may as well be hand in hand skipping happily toward your demise. Travel time is directly impacted by map terrain, while faster travel is favored by a higher outdoorsman skill. Deconstructing the world map's tiles and how long it takes the Vault Dweller to wade through each of them, city tiles take 6 in-game hours to cross. Ocean and desert tiles take 10. Tiles containing mountains take a whopping 20 hours to pass. In a game full of failure, those hours can sneak up on you with the subtlety of a demolition. As Vault 13's remaining time powder kegs toward your explosion. For every 50 days that have passed, a screen displaying the vault's water supply gets progressively more desperate, reminding the player of what's at stake. So you have to consider how your behaviors hasten that deadline. Antidotes take hours to prepare, sure, so does reading books. But did you grab a rope before heading to Vault 15? Lose 14 days. Did you perform that quest incriminating the fat man to the letter of the law? Get banished from town, lose out on quests, lose out on an ally. Did you dive into the deepest, darkest dungeon located in the loneliest corner of the world map, fully prepared? Trick question. You're never really prepared for that place on the first run. Lose out on, give or take, 24 to 30 days, or at least your most recent save. Did you rescue the princess from the bandits' hideout in time? Do not pass go. Do not collect this game's sequel. The failures can add up quickly if you're not vigilant, but decisions made loose and fast are meant to be the rule rather than the exception in a first playthrough. Even for the players who know what they're doing, there's a second, hidden time limit that gobsmacks everyone indiscriminately. If the Vault Dweller arrives at Necropolis too late, and it's all but guaranteed that you will arrive at Necropolis too late, get ready for some monster truck madness. You'll have paid for the whole seats to the Thunderdome, but you only need the edge. The already broken city has been reduced to blood puddles by an army of supermutants. It's here where Fallout's hidden time limit informs the player that the consequences of their actions are already beyond the purview of a first playthrough. It's easily one of the best sales pitches for an immediate second playthrough in any game that I've ever experienced. So, given all this margin for error, how do you play with the hand that you've been dealt? One of my favorite poker players of all time has to be Doyle Brunson. In the World Series of Poker Championship of 1976, Brunson, a card shark, was heads up against lucky amateur Jesse Alto for all the king's marbles. Heads up usually means face-to-face in a given hand. In a tournament scenario, it means the last 2 players standing to win it all. For this heads up final round, Brunson's hand was 10-2. Depending on the day, a 10-deuce is statistically the 3rd or 4th worst hand you can get in Texas Hold'em. The flop, that is to say the first 3 cards to be dealt on the table, were ace, jack, and 10. Brunson, understanding his opponent's lack of experience at the game, went with what future multi-champion Daniel Negreanu would later define as a snowflake bet. A bet that broadcasts to your opponents that you have the nuts, the best possible hand. What makes a snowflake bet its namesake is that cards behind it will usually melt if your opponent is packing heat. Brunson, as we've established, did not have the best hand. He didn't even have the second best pair on the board. Regardless, the game of poker is about playing the man, and not the cards he's holding. Positioned as the first to act post-flop, Doyle shoved. He went all in. Jesse Alto did have the top pair. In fact, he had the nuts, ace and jack. In practically all situations, you do not fold an ace-jack top pair. It takes blatant disregard for the book to fold an ace-jack hand. But tournament-style poker is really a game of both luck and skill, determined by table position, rate of play, several other details that aren't worth sharing, and most importantly, understanding your opponent in such fine detail that you'd be labeled a serial killer in any other application of the same observation technique. Jesse Alto did what anyone in this situation would do. He called Brunson's bet. The turn, the 4th card to be shown, was mathematically unlikely, landing at a 2 and giving Doyle Brunson a losing 2 pair against Alto. The river, the 5th card to be shown, could have been mistaken for divine intervention. Another 2, exactly what Brunson needed, and also less than half of a percentage point in likelihood. This poker phenomenon is called a runner-runner. It's when the 4th and 5th cards to be shown on the table are the exact 2 cards the losing hand needs to beat their opponent. What happened at the winning round of the 76 World Series of Poker Championship was classified as a bad beat, an almost guaranteed win that, by all metrics and simulations, could only be defeated by sheer fortune mistaken for destiny. This gets even crazier. The following year at the World Series of Poker main event of 1977, Doyle Brunson was dealt the same 10-2 hand, heads up against Gary Bones Berland, holding 8 and 5 on a 10-8-5 flop with the best flopped hand. This time, Berland shoved post-flop. Brunson, having flopped the high pair, called. The board turned 2 and rivered a third 10, earning Brunson yet another full house and a repeat championship win. That's how you get a poker hand named after you. The Doyle Brunson was etched into stone from 1977 forward. One of my favorite quotes from Doyle Brunson is, "When luck shuts the door, you gotta bust in through the window." Fallout's game design embodies this quote. That is to say, in Fallout, you literally and figuratively make your own luck. Fallout's design is largely linear, with an entire buffet's worth of choice in how you'd like to wrangle its problems. Contributing to this is a story that is narratively modular and a game that's mechanically interchangeable. Fallout's story consists of a 3-act structure, although you can technically discover Acts 2 and 3 before ever getting to Act 1. But the game's well-crafted guardrails ensure little to no deviation for a first-time player. At a mechanical level, Fallout gives you the guideposts, but offers complete and total freedom in choosing how you'd like to collaborate in that process. This collaboration truly starts at character creation. Fallout's character creation manages to feel like a marriage between both GURPS and Dungeons & Dragons, despite the divorce with Steve Jackson Games. And that's kinda huge. A big appeal to GURPS over D&D is its stat purchasing system, as opposed to choosing a pre-selected class with little to no attribute freedom. With GURPS, the player is also expected to pick both advantages and disadvantages alike. This allows for more realistic characters who are able to specialize instead of becoming jacks of all trades. On the surface, there isn't exactly anything special about the special system. It's largely all the stats you'd find in D&D plus luck and endurance. What makes the special system stand out has more to do with its execution, which can mostly be attributed to Tim Kane's ingenuity as a programmer. Where the GURPS heritage expresses itself is when the player is asked to pick 2 traits and 3 tagged skills. Traits function like simultaneous advantages and disadvantages, where each benefit comes with a price. In plain English, traits operate on a broader scope. The Night Person trait, for example, boosts perception and intelligence each by 1 point from 6 p.m. until 6 a.m., while decreasing both stats by 1 point from 6:01 a.m. to 6 p.m. Skills are the more fine-grained details of a character build. When the player tags the 3 skills that they want, they're really selecting which skills will increase each time they level up, regardless of how they allocate their skill point allowance with each level gained. This allows a player who specializes in their selected skills to either continue to increase those skills at an advantage, or focus on less developed attributes given the automatic progression of tagged skills. Any skill can be increased when a player's gained another level. The player is incentivized to advance tagged skills, but the perks that become available depend on the skills that have been fostered up until that milestone. This allows for further specialization. On a deeper level, Fallout's character builder is actually a world builder. Contextualized abstractly, it's boys with rabid dogs and people blowing up like blood sausages. Character creation and people blowing up like blood sausages go hand in hand because how you make your character special determines what or whom blows up, how they explode, and when. How your build presents its fair share of advantages and disadvantages to your playthrough, just like it determines what will figuratively and literally blow up during that experience. Take intelligence, for example. A higher intelligence is a prerequisite to pass certain skill checks throughout Fallout. It opens up important dialogue options. It's practically a requirement for having 2 out of the 3 ways to defeat one of Fallout's final bosses. Should you decide to spec a low intelligence, which Tim Kaine has lovingly called the potato build, you don't just lose access to intelligence checks. You end up creating a world that handles your mentality with white gloves.
Oh, yes, you did good. And I'm sure you have a lot to tell.
I love how he treats.
You lose the ability to have important conversations with most, if not all, NPCs, which blacklists you from all sorts of information and also quests. So what would behoove you to sacrifice all this opportunity? Entertainment value, stress testing Fallout's mechanics, and quote-unquote for the challenge are all acceptable answers. But there's also one reason to pick the potato build that sits high above the rest. Harry is the bridge troll barring entry to Fallout's second act. When you first encounter him, he's a snake in the grass ready to end your run. Even for well-considered character builds, bypassing Harry requires high speech and luck checks, with those checks being slightly favored by selecting a female character, and he's still an 11-foot stick in the mud. I've had plenty of chances to simulate this encounter. You are going to fail at Harry on a first pass. On a 15th pass, and even with good luck and a female body, you realize that you are designed to fail his figuratively hairy encounter. The super mutant's only other non-violent solution outside of the near impossible character build that reinforces his unmoved presence is to take you to his manager, who is a surefire death sentence at your current level. This ogre of a super mutant is a quadruple bolted door made of petrified redwood, but the potato build busts through his window. With a low intelligence, the Vault Dweller can match Harry's dumb and just walk right past him.
That is the whole reason you take a dumb character.
It makes you realize that choosing to make your character a potato is not a sacrifice, but rather a trade. Given the correct decisions and acquired experience, The potato build trades what the player already knows. The 15 to 20 hours a first-time player will spend getting acquainted with Fallout for a build that can shatter one of Fallout's most dense obstacles effortlessly. That's amazing. Before, I've called it modular design. It's similar to Tim Kane's character builder tools that he would use for tabletop campaigns with his coworkers, where you plug in your values and usually end up in different situations given how your character's built. Today, this game design has been qualified as emergent gameplay, but back then, it was the indirect byproduct foisted upon an incredibly well-aligned development team by the business decision to abandon the Steve Jackson license 6 months before Fallout released. The best demonstration of how emergent gameplay factors granularly toward the solutions available in a particular quest is the Khan's hideout. The Khans are a gang of raiders who, like the entirety of Shady Sands, came about after a great schism that happened some time ago at Vault 15. Entirely relying on whether the player decides to return back to Shady Sands 2 in-game days after solving the town's rad scorpion problem, Aradesh, the town's leader, informs the player that his daughter, Tandy, has been kidnapped by the Khans. The Khan's hideout is Fallout's multifaceted emergent gameplay poster child. To call it a vertical slice would be misleading. It is a vertical slice's vertical slice. On my first playthrough, I rescued Tandy using the tried and true charisma boost I've used in previous Fallout games and real life. With a higher charisma, the player can intimidate the raiders to letting Tandy go and avoiding conflict entirely. On my second playthrough, I went with a pugilist build, an unarmed combat playstyle I wanted to explore more due to having a great time with the build in Fallout 4, using the legendary Pickman's Blade. This time, I rescued Tandy by forgoing all of the bloodshed my lack of persuasion skills could afford, by instead opting to challenge Garl, the leader of the Khans, in hand-to-hand combat. The high charisma build asked only that the Vault Dwellers show up, and choose a dialogue option. The unarmed combat build involved a whole lot more, which we can get into later. What I've outlined here are 2 out of 7 possible solutions to the Khan's hideout. The trial by combat solution is one of 2 methods that involved actual scripting from the development team. If you've ever played games like Little Big Planet, Dreams, maybe Final Fantasy XII or 7R, you should have an implicit understanding of how scripting works. It's like a function in algebra. When the player inputs or does variable X, the game outputs or reacts with Y. Having a higher unarmed skill makes the dialogue option to challenge Garl to a fistfight become available. If the player chooses this option, everyone will then scenario into a combat arena surrounding Garl and the Vault Dweller. Here the challengers will fight and the surrounding raiders will be scripted to not flag the punching match as a battle-worthy engagement. During the fight, if the Vault Dweller is able to get Garl's hit points below 25%, he'll script into giving up and letting the player exit the Khan's hideout with Tandy. Or I guess I accidentally killed him and everyone was okay with that? The fact that Tandy can be rescued with almost no scripting for the hideout's 7 possible outcomes is a testament to Fallout's modular design. And considering what I've discovered, there are actually around 14 possible outcomes for this one quest. Emphasizing all of this choice is the fact that, in the event that the player decides to kill anyone in the Khan's hideout, the experience points given at the end of this quest decrease by 50 for every raider killed. In other words, Fallout cares about player choice, but it doesn't want to leverage one mechanical solution over another. Blowing up like blood sausages is no mysterious stranger to any Fallout game. It's the bloody mess perk, but also it's the raw satisfaction of conflict resolution. Contextualized as one of the first 2 design pillars for Fallout's vision statement, blood sausage explosions are, shockingly, the brutally ironic comic relief, but also the emotionally lighter of the first 2 bullet points from that vision statement. This phenomenon, people exploding as if they were next to Butcher Pete himself, was a curiosity exclusive to Fallout's spiritual prequel, Wasteland. The heavier of Fallout's first 2 vision statement design pillars was inspired by an early quest found in Wasteland involving a boy and his dog. The boy Bobby requests that you check on his dog Rex inside of a cave. Upon further investigation, the player has discovered that Rex has turned rabid, and the easiest way to solve the problem, easiest for the dog at least, would be to end his life. No matter what you choose, Bobby comes knocking for an update on Rex's status. It's then the player's choice whether to tell the boy the outcome of his only friend. Decisions can be tough, even if the outcome you expect sounds promising. Both of these aspects, the boys with rabid dogs and blowing up like blood sausages, paint a landscape that crossroads optimism and realism at the intersections of irony and brutality. Is it over the top? 1000%. But I also don't know the Fallout series any other way. Junktown shows us how the blood sausage is made. The settlement's fate is determined by whether you side with its ad hoc mayor, Killian Darkwater, or the guy who's as greedy as he is gluttonous, Gizmo. Killian wants to maintain a sense of law and order, while Gizmo wants the growing power from his profitable casino to remain unchecked. You can really tell that Junktown was one of Fallout's more developed areas by how the location is able to ham out its theatrics. The town is loaded with several scripted events to make its battle between two moralities feel as engaging as possible. Whether it's Gizmo's goon making an assassination attempt on Killian, or how sleeping at the town's end turns into a hostage scenario, how the town offers its two recruitable companions, or witnessing a troublemaker getting the walls of the local bar painted with his meat bits. Junktown wants you to feel its beating heart. All of these events are detectable during a first playthrough for a trained eye, but they would have contemporarily made Junktown feel alive to a first-time player. Believe it or not, Gizmo is his own immersive gardening phenomenon, no different from a wild nightshade surrounded by sunflowers. We talked about all that immersion for a good reason. Several hours into Fallout, like 16, after being sleep posture agnostic toward NPCs at night, I became sleep posture certain that NPCs didn't have them, or sitting postures. They don't. In fact, the art team managed to make Gizmo the only person capable of sitting down in all of Fallout. They just could not figure out how to make any other NPC sedentary. This made Gizmo often imitated, but never replicated. On the contrary, everything I've described until now has made me too immersed to let it dim my experience. One of the strengths of reading a medium like a book versus watching visual mediums involving a screen is how each medium makes your brain work for its intended portrayal. What a book depicts is driven by your reading comprehension paired with your imagination, but films and TV have their own tricks. The Kuleshov effect is a technique that shows an actor's seemingly neutral face in back-to-back cuts in response to a visual declaration. What the Kuleshov effect accomplishes is teasing viewers' minds to decide what the character is expressing or feeling, usually without ever being told. Similarly, an author uses intrigue and mystery to make your brain work for their story's twists and turns. All of Fallout's flourishes demand the same participation from the player, while never feeling like the game ever has to ask. This magnitude of engagement makes its flawed world a country mile from immersion breaking. During Fallout's production, QA testers were playing the game in the same exact state, and they were either too mesmerized to notice or care. Some QA testers were even coming in on their weekends voluntarily and without pay to playtest Fallout. They weren't just immersed, they were obsessed. To make a game like this, the mechanics have to be mesmerizing. Having played Fallout, color me mesmerized. It's Leonard Boyarsky with the unplugged TV and the game's intro all over again. In terms of Fallout's gray morality, we need to discuss how the experience divvies up in the context of Junktown's outcome. While siding with Killian feels like the obvious good choice, Junktown doesn't thrive nearly as much as it does if the player chooses Gizmo. Fallout will even reward the player with extra experience points for siding with Gizmo to reward this decision. This all falls within the design pillar to let the player decide what is the best course of action. But this also brings up a curious point. Considered individually, siding with Gizmo gives more experience points than siding with Killian. But, considered holistically, choosing Killian gives more experience to a second-time player. This mechanical reality all boils down to Tycho. Tycho's awesome. The data doesn't lie. Out of all the companions in Fallout, Tycho is the best. He's a long-range rifleman. He fights like he's only here to have hair and kick butt. And he's all out of hair. When he's not shooting long distances with his rifle, he's blowing his problems away with a double-barreled 12 gauge. Definitely a good friend to have in any standoff, especially hostage situations. Tycho represents the Desert Rangers, a faction that eventually becomes allied under the umbrella of the New California Republic, the same caliber of masked Banff that's clapping freaks at the beginning of New Vegas. Narratively speaking, the only way that Tycho can be recruited is by siding with Killian during the Junktown conflict. His companionship will even yield an extra 300 experience points that the player wouldn't get otherwise, which, to me, is the smoking gun for Fallout nudging toward its grander vision. Of course, there's other notable details in support of the choose Killian outcome. Gizmo has a unique death animation. He full-on chest bursts at the time of expiration, and then slumps over in a pool of his own mess, looking like the first 10 minutes of 7. Not Killian, though. Killian gets a boring death, face down in a puddle of his own blood. Unique death animations are only provided during Fallout's big set-piece moments, to really punch up the satisfaction. So, I take Gizmo's gruesome death over Killian's unelaborate death as indirect support toward an intended playstyle. Another supportive detail involves a bug that became a feature with the help of Gizmo. At some point during playtesting, the QA team discovered that, as an exploit to the pickpocketing skill, players could plant items on NPCs. This was an oversight on Tim Kane's generally robust and flexible code, but it was fun, and as a designer, fun is all that matters to Tim. Kane decided to keep the exploit in, and the team decided to make what would become known as the reverse pickpocket, an integral part of the Gizmo and Killian conflict. Siding with Killian has the Vault Dweller plant a recording device on Gizmo's person before getting him to admit his plan to have the mayor killed, implicating his premeditation and leading to a standoff. Siding with Gizmo is enticing. It's a decision that allows for more experience points for choosing the casino slumlord that also leads to a better ending for Junktown. But overall, choosing Killian grants more experience both beyond and directly behind the keyboard. Fallout's core gameplay journey involves a sort of wide linear experience. At its start, you can technically go anywhere on the map that you'd like, but lack of direction and vision act as barriers. You start the game near the Wasteland's northmost barrier, with mountains directly to the west. Paired with the only provided lead that Vault 15 is to the east, your first world map direction is all but virtually assured. On the way to Vault 15 is Shady Sands, which presents an option to deviate from the main goal. But you don't have to go to Vault 15 if you don't want to. Technically, visiting almost all locations is optional for completing the game. Because Tim Cain was, according to his group dynamic, the Funkle paid to be the lead programmer, solutions to Fallout's main quests typically feature at least 3 ways to solve them, with those 3 solutions involving force, diplomacy, or stealth. The various side quests and whatnot promote at least 2 solutions to every problem. Given this varied style of approach and mechanical depth, any quest anyone could accuse of being fetchy would be a fetch quest in name only. On a first playthrough, I spec'd a character that favored charisma and perception over strength, while sacrificing endurance and agility for better intelligence and luck. As an attribute, charisma always leads to entertaining options in the later Fallout games, if not outright verbal backdoors for hairy situations not involving a super mutant named Harry. Where I missed the mark in my first stat selection was choosing lower agility. Agility determines your character's action points. Action points are the player's ability to move and act during a turn on the battlefield, so having less action points requires stalwart decision making. While I could sort of talk my way in and out of most scenarios during our first playthrough, battles commanded immaculate execution and a bit more luck, given my mediocre allotment of perception on a character who excels at speech and small guns. Regardless of a player's advantages on the battlefield, early battling has a steep learning curve, and you'd be remiss to not try and recruit some assistance to help equalize Fallout's battle difficulty. Ian is the first recruitable character of Fallout. Ian is, for all intents and purposes, the man. He looks like he listens to the only remaining Dio album in existence on repeat. He's bad at using one of his best weapons, the SMG, so much so that his reputation in online forums can be summarized as, "Do not give this man anything besides a pistol." While his spray and pray can be managed, he has a tendency to friendly fire on allies standing in the way of his targets. Finding an entire group of enemies that look exactly like him cannot. I love him all the more for these flaws. When he runs out of ammo, Ian roundhouse kicks his enemies as if he grew up watching preserved Bruce Lee films, which is about as metal as it gets. Being the second best companion makes Ian a valuable teammate. In a charismatic playthrough, you can ask Ian to join you and the game will roll a speech check. If you pass the speech check, he's yours till death or departure. If you fail, he's forever unrecruitable and you'll need a soft reset to get him. Of course, getting Ian on my first try made me overlook that I had the persuasion skills of a cult leader. On the second go, I wasn't as lucky. The only other way of getting Ian is by coughing up 100 bottle caps, the fiat currency of all Fallout games. On my second playthrough, I utilized the common strategy of making charisma a dump stat, or a stat that you intentionally make lower so you can make other stats stronger. Because of a lower charisma, I learned from trial and error of about 5 to 6 soft resets, I had to meet Ian ready to pay 100 bottle caps or face the Wasteland forever without him. Certainly a loftier requirement to get some help in battle, but well worth the time and effort. And also a mechanical alert that my specialization as a brawler would shape my second playthrough to be reliant on understanding the economy of Fallout. If Ian teaches us anything, it's how our characters built different on each playthrough. Concerning Junktown's companions, we've already discussed Tycho, so let's discuss Fallout's first ever created companion. Dogmeat is best boy. Dogmeat bites. He bites, and he bites, and he bites. And then, he bites some more. Dogmeat once scared a man so badly, he possessed that man with enough fear to run in a unique animation on repeat and without sleep. To his own detriment, Dogmeat will follow you to the depths of hell. I mean, so will every other companion. But his devotion is the most believable. And this is coming from a guy who prefers cats. Out of all the companions, Dogmeat has the best agility, earning him 4 attacks when he's next to an enemy. You can overlook his lower damage output for being tenaciously in pursuit of your enemies. Dogmeat can be recruited one of 2 ways, by either donning the black leather jacket armor as a nod to Mad Max, or by feeding him iguana on a stick. Whereas Ian requires that the player can adapt despite their character's build, and Tycho's recruitment is morality specific, bordering on destiny, Dogmeat's companionship requires mechanics that align more with point-and-click adventure games than RPGs. Wearing the leather jacket or feeding Dogmeat for his companionship may look like happenstance, but in reality, it's a solvable puzzle. Last and certainly least of all the companions is Katya. Katya is undoubtedly the worst. When you meet Katya, she's either staring at or trying to have a conversation with a wall. And I think that's foreboding enough for what I'm about to discuss. On average, Katya misses more attacks than she lands. When she does land an attack, her damage feels like it's capped at 2 to 3 hit points. Her apparent low hit chance with low damage is in direct competition with being a meat shield as her second most useful battle feature. Her most useful battle feature would be equivalent to a pawn sacrifice in chess to save one of your other allies. Ultimately, Katya provides more value off your team than she does on it. Speaking from experience, I don't think any of Fallout's developers expected Katya to make it to the Mariposa military base. Several times, she would just walk through a damaging force field, blow up like an action figure attached to an M80 on the 4th of July, and crash the game. She's terrible. Given the benefit of the doubt, Katya's design might be a stroke of genius. Mechanically, her design is reflective of the Boneyard, an area that was notoriously unfinished during development. Outside of teaching the player that not all companions are gladiators, the only other purpose I can think of why Katya exists is to narratively reinforce that she comes from a faction that refuses violence. The followers of the Apocalypse, Katya's faction, take on a pacifist approach to conflict. Because the world ended due to violence, the followers' credo aims to not repeat that mistake. They are what follows a world that ended its bloodshed with destruction, and so they seek to do the opposite by fostering their influence non-violently. Narrative harmony is the one grace I can give Katya's dismal companionship, but do yourself a favor and avoid her. In my last video, we vaguely discussed how the NPCs in a game's final dungeon could sort of work as classic JRPG party members, on the continuum between the final dungeon of Ys 1 and just about any Final Fantasy party. Fallout's companions would fit somewhere in between, acting as a stepping stone between no to full ownership of actions not made by the player character. Learning the companions of Fallout is like learning a new stovetop for the first time after moving apartments. You have to discover its intricacies through trial and error in order to get it working the way it needs you to participate rather than how you want it to work. In summary, control what you can and learn what you can't. Above all, permanent death guides companionship. I prefer permadeath as a feature of Fallout because it reinforces decision efficiency, a constant unspoken reminder throughout the game. Because of this, save scumming is more of a requirement rather than a suggestion if you want your companions for when they really count. Enemies like to pathfind toward the Vault Dweller, and companions tend to pathfind toward enemies the player has tagged. Sometimes companions will just kind of do their own thing. Usually that companion's name is Katya. Dogmeat does have a tendency to veer from the battlefield if you're not wary of his position before entering into battle. Companions' arsenals are limited by their character animations. Ian has access to small, single-shot firearms, as well as the never-to-be-equipped, even though it would be helpful if you could, Uzi. Dogmeat, for obvious reasons, can't be spoken to or given a weapon. Tycho specializes in long-range rifles at a distance, and his trusty double barrel when he's heads up with danger. Katya feels like she has a butter knife covered in butter. We did not care to explore Katya's capabilities. Companions' potential, what they prefer and excel at, are secrets that you can either discover by making time-expensive mistakes or circumventing the bullet-riddled baptism by reading about them in an old forum post. Companions don't level up, but they can be cajoled to be functional in heated scenarios. Any companion that can be spoken to can be told to draw their best weapon available, or stay near, moderately close, or keep their distance. This impacts their positioning on the battlefield. One of the more important aspects of companions is monitoring their inventory. All interactable companions can use stim packs on themselves, or, in the case of a companion like Dogmeat, or a human companion without a stim pack in their inventory, the Vault Dweller can burn action points to use the consumable healing item on that ally. Because companions will not tell you when they are low or out of healing items or ammo, the players should keep a pulse on them if they want their friends to survive. After a while, this hypervigilance becomes second nature. You eventually learn that if a companion is fleeing mid-battle, that's dollars to donuts a buddy who is low on health and without healing items. Similarly, if Ian or Tycho are not using their guns in the heat of conflict, they're out of ammunition for that particular weapon. Barring stats and weapon output, everything I've summarized was discovered during my first playthrough. I love companions. What I find most amazing about them is that they were a resurrected idea from Jason Anderson that was fever pitched during Fallout's last year of development. Once the decision was made to include companions, Dogmeat served as the null that was tested, proven, and then demonstrated by programmer Jesse Henig for what Fallout's companionship would become. Really, companion behavior is just a revamped enemy AI. Again, this was a victory for the game's heavily fortified and malleable code, but it's also a notable example of gardening for the game's development, seeing as it became a signature feature in Fallout sequels. It's a good thing we spent time talking about friends like these, because with all of the monsters out there, you are gonna need them. We'll explore this in much more depth at a later time, but, for the sake of brevity, monsters are vehicles for revelations. They are mysteries incarnate. By virtue of etymology, monsters show us things. A monster is captivating when we cannot understand it, and one of the few words we use to classify that fascination is the term sublime. Oppositely, an excellent monster can reveal a grotesque amount of detail to us when we try to understand or contain it. For the limited amount of monsters that Fallout has, there's undoubtedly a megaton of mileage to be gleaned from each of the notable ones. One more rule about monsters that I haven't mentioned is that when it concerns video games, one generation's monster is the next generation's plaything. So the first monster we should mention is the Glow. The Glow is a legacy made to appear like an interchangeable, resource-intense, resource-bountiful dungeon. But before all of that, the Glow is its own character. The earliest a player can hear about the Glow is in Shady Sands. After rescuing Tandy, Aradesh farewells the Vault Dweller with a blessing. May the water you find in the desert not shine at you in the dark. The great thing about the Glow is that, outside of nuclear waste in a late-game area, and some mostly non-threatening enemies in Necropolis, we never actually see anything glowing. Likewise, when you eventually go to the Glow, you don't see any of its namesake hanging around. But you certainly feel its presence, as the distance traveled to it transforms from desert to what I can only describe as an eldritch-looking destruction. When you finally arrived at the Glow, you're instantaneously greeted with a lethal dosage of radioactive decay to the dome. The Glow's entrance is my personal contender for the scariest image in all of Fallout. This is driven by the imagination with how the place is teased. Before ever deciding to journey to the Tartarus, you hear about the Glow being a place of no return, signified by the aurora borealis of neon green that the area emits at sundown. The Glow acts like a reverse Polaris, indicating which direction the Wastelanders should avoid at all costs. Connecting the dungeon's world map image to a quest provided by the Brotherhood of Steel, the Glow can be recontextualized as Fallout's primordial ooze. The Glow was the military research facility where the Brotherhood and the Forced Evolutionary Virus originated, before moving camp to Mariposa and then relocating to the Lost Hills. The best part about this dungeon is that exploring it is entirely optional. You can grab what you need on the first floor if you'd like, or you can sunk cost fallacy yourself to fathom its unexplored depths. How much of the lore you find inside the Glow is entirely proportional to how well you're prepared to unravel its mysteries. If you do explore it, you're in for a wild ride. Consecutive playthroughs considered, the Glow as a subversion of one generation's monster becomes the next generation's plaything. On a first run, the Glow is like a time bomb with a generous countdown. You've got to handle it with white gloves so you don't accidentally cross the wrong wires. It's also a place that excels at seesawing your confidence against its brutality, in such a way that the kid on the other end of that park ride is always at least 2.5 times heavier than you. Later games pay homage to the word Glow, making it both a nod and an honorific. The glowing one becomes an enemy to be feared. The glowing sea, a nightmare made real that must be trod lightly. For these reasons, on a second or even 99th run, the Glow is a place that must always be respected. For the later Fallout games, it becomes a term that always commands respect. If you've ever played a Fallout game before, without looking it up, can you tell me what this guy is? What Harold is? No, seriously. In a lot of ways, we already know where the ghoul comes from. Even the ghouls of Fallout know where they come from. If you run around just outside of Necropolis, you'll get thrown into battle encounters with the faction who calls themselves the Zombies. But where does the ghoul really come from? Given what I've experienced, no one has a consistent answer to this question. Bethesda's Fallout 3 speculates that turning ghoul is a genetic response to nuclear explosions. In Fallout 3, the player can also listen to Galaxy News Radio to catch an episode of The Adventures of Herbert Daring Dashwood and his stalwart ghoul manservant, Argyle, in all two brief series of pulp adventures shared by the titular characters. In one of these radio broadcasted adventures, the pair have been captured by super mutants. To get out of the mess, Argyle uses his signature attack, the Shady Sands Shuffle, a familiar-sounding reverse pickpocketing technique where he plants a grenade in the pocket of his victim, blowing away the super mutants and allowing the duo to escape. These details hint at deeper truths. Some ghouls are the literal connective tissue between pre- and post-apocalyptic worlds. All ghouls are the literal connective tissue between old and new, past and present, and the unknown and the known. Where Fallout's thematic intent to subvert its more idealistic side of retrofuturism is carried technologically by robots like Mr. Handy, which can be reprogrammed to turn heel, the ghoul is an organic subversion of the fantastical undead. Traditionally, a ghoul is not something you want to explore. It's a reanimated creature trapped between life and death, if not also a thrall for a powerful dark magic user, usually a lich or a necromancer. A traditional ghoul bathes in the sublime. It doesn't engage in civilities, let alone register coherence. It's usually a combination of necrotic, ravenous, ferocious, and hard to kill again. It makes eternal life look like Nightmare City. Even when I described a ghoul just now, there was an emphasis on its lack of dignity. A ghoul from Fallout, however, is someone worth exploring. Harold was a person made to look like an undead who you can talk to. Technically, we don't know what he is. Officially, we know how he is. Mentally, he's not always there, but you can coax more of his humanity out of him when you treat him with dignity. Donating bottle caps to Harold gets him to recount a backstory about a research expedition to the Mariposa military base with the talented and intelligent Richard Gray. Indirectly, Harold gives the Vault Dweller some of the more intimate details about Fallout's villain back when he was human, summarized in an innocuous quote.
God, Richard.
Therein lies the sublime of the ghoul. We can't explain what a specific ghoul interlaps. Only the ghoul can reveal their answer. In later Fallout games, if that ghoul is feral or glowing, good luck trying to have a conversation and also surviving. On the scale of feral to free-willed, only the latter is equipped to provide any knowledge that you seek. Painted by a bygone era's brush, the ghoul is a sphinx. They have the body of a beast, but the head of a human. Ghouls don't dispense riddles, but if they're in a sharing mood, they will give you a version of the truth, limited by their human experiences, but not constrained by a human's lifespan. It's this information that the player can use to make sense of the post-apocalyptic puzzle that is Fallout's history. But, if anything, the ghoul teaches us that no one in Fallout has a monopoly on the truth, and it never hurts to have some undead mysteries left unsolved. It's Harold who also leads the Vault Dweller to complete a quest involving the two other monsters that I wanted to discuss, the Super Mutant and the Deathclaw. Where the ghouls have contained behaviors that lead to sublime oral histories and or mysteries when they are reminded by the player that they were once human, the Super Mutants have a sublime origin that the player slowly contains by getting reminded to match their monstrosity. The Super Mutants are typically revealed in one of two ways, one by itself or several mutants all at once. There's a high probability that the first super mutant you ever see is dead on arrival. This is also the only mutant you will ever see alone in Fallout. Super mutants alone are not a threat. Super mutants together have the buddy system of a poorly decapitated Hydra, which is why when you first see a super mutant alive, there's a high probability that you're going to die. By partaking in Fallout's main questline, the player is able to fence the super mutants into a focal point. That focal point magnifies at Mariposa. It's no surprise that the Brotherhood and Mariposa tunes carry similar background hums, considering that the Brotherhood took flight at Mariposa specifically because of the FEV contained there. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Seeing as the super mutants are part and parcel to something much grander, let's continue to focus on the one before we pay attention to it all. In the eyes of the gardener, the Deathclaw is the blue ribbon winner at the state fair. Originally designed by Scott Campbell, the monster's first concept was considered literally and figuratively too hairy of a task for sculpting and scanning into 3D. But with Interplay's D&D license and a newly formed division called Black Isle, all of that would change. Black Isle Studio had access to D&D's 2nd edition monster manual, while working on what would become Planescape Torment. After deciding to move in a different direction, the studio abandoned its already sculpted and scanned Tarrasque, making the discarded monster a virtual windfall for Fallout. Here's the endpoint of the creature's timeline, nicely laid out for us. The 2nd edition model of the Tarrasque is never used again by the receding monster manuals. If I stop this side story here, you'd have a decent idea on how impactful its inclusion in Fallout was. In the 5th edition of D&D, there are 6 creatures with a higher challenge rating than a red or gold dragon. Taking a step with the gate of an Olympic swimming pool, the Tarrasque is one of those monsters. Everything considered, this makes the Deathclaw the borrowed kaiju from Dungeons & Dragons. The Deathclaw isn't as big as the 50 feet tall, 70 feet long Tarrasque, boasting its 8 to 12 foot height and a gate of at least 2.5 Vault Dwellers. But it still has the perception and pursuit of a certified killer. In a game that insists on humbling you, boy does the Deathclaw lift your spirits. Well, after it's humbled you, of course. During battle, with enough of an action budget, the Deathclaw can outrun you. The Deathclaw is a transmogrified apocalypse, ready to dispense the harsh elements of the Wasteland to anyone unlucky enough to encounter it. It's one of the many sleeping giants born from the storm of bombs that once filled the skies with the power of the sun. A reminder of humanity's destructive hubris, capable of ending your playthrough, even when you're at a sufficient level to beat the entire game. The Deathclaw never really leaves the realm of the sublime. Its table setting sketches an image where a man saw its shimmering eyes in the dark. What you mostly hear about the Deathclaw are fantastical stories about a supposed encounter. The cryptid reputation surrounding the Deathclaw has only hearsay involved, because no one's ever actually seen one and lived to tell the tale. It builds up the idea that your first encounter with one is guaranteed to be your last with anything. It's sort of like the Wasteland's Jersey Devil. You're dealing with the idea of a Deathclaw well before being face to tail with it. And then you enter the hexagon where that tail about faces without warning. And you eventually learn where that hexagon is located after enough game over screens. Defeating death, it turns out, is not that easy, when those are the first 5 letters belonging to the beast that's killing you for an interminable 2 hours. The Deathclaw serves as an excellent misdirection for the game's central narrative. This even aligns with the Deathclaw's challenge rating. It maintains its status as one of the most difficult monsters that you've encountered well into the late game of Fallout. Good luck if you stumble upon the Mama Deathclaw. She's harder to kill. The creature's threat level only rises as steadily and consistently as the game's story arc. Neutralizing the Deathclaw's slope to sublime takes a lot of effort, tantamount to legendary feats of strength. I've tested this. On my second playthrough, I had to reach level 18, the same level where I'm able to unlock the coveted Slayer perk, depicted by the Vault Boy looking like Conan the Barbarian, in order to reduce the threat of the Deathclaw noticeably. Achieving this level is technically outside of the purview of a standard playthrough. The honorific for level 18 is Hero of the Glowing Lands, solidifying that the Deathclaw can finally be contained only once you've conquered all of the Wasteland. But where Fallout's King of the Monsters plays its best role is showing us how to separate the god from its Godzilla. Defeating the atomic wingless dragon that the Deathclaw is reveals its hulking green horde, a dead super mutant with orders to knapsack normals on sight, the true perpetrator of the missing caravans that the Deathclaw was initially blamed for. This brings us to the Blue Rose of the Wasteland. Never capable of occurring naturally, the Blue Rose is almost manufactured in such a way that I don't know if I'll ever see anything like him again. I hope for the best, but I've got to keep my expectations realistic. If that sounds hyperbolic, I'd encourage you to listen to these next words intently. In almost confident chronological order, you stumble upon, feel, detect, hear about, and, for the most determined, actively research, and, in a lot of situations, are negatively impacted and indirectly killed by the Master, long and many times before you ever actually see and speak to the Master. The Master works as an end-of-game introduction because his plan aligns with the entire discoverable plot that Fallout has to offer, so much so that 2 entirely separate ways of defeating him are locked behind optional exploration. The Master has the makings of a god. In alchemy, there's the phrase as above, so below. The philosopher Aristotle once claimed that the prima materia, the first matter or the one, can be found in all matter or the many. It's where we get the phrase one is all is one. In philosophy, God is also argued to have omnipresence, omnipotence, omniscience, the list goes on. The God of Christianity is defined as the Holy Trinity, a mystery of 3 persons in one God, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Relabeled as archetypes, the Creator, the Redeemer, and the Sanctifier, or the flame that can purify, sustain, and spread. The Master's felt long before he's ever heard, being an omnipresence not unfamiliar to a deity. And it's just so damn good of an omnipresence. If you get to Necropolis too late, and you will get to Necropolis too late on a first run, you will see the mutant army, ready to intercept you or your life at a moment's notice, should you fail a speech or luck check, which you will. In battle, even this noticeably weaker side of the Master's pecking order has you outmatched in about every metric at this stage in the game. Their plan is greater than your stumbling toward a water chip. Later in the narrative, when you're headed toward the Hydra or Hydras, this challenge only continues to rise until the Vault Dweller achieves the story's falling action. But before all of this, the Master's mask is on full display within Junktown, the Hub, and the Boneyard, working conspicuously as his cult recruitment operation. The public-facing choir of angels are the children of the cathedral. They're pretty iron-toothed toward outsiders.
Why do you disturb an elder of the cathedral?
Led by a man named after the god of dreams. With exception to its northeast region, The children of the cathedral are a presence that can be felt throughout every corner of the Wasteland. In every town located within that triangle, the Vault Dweller can find a cathedral clinic. The clinics act as a facelift for the children. It makes them look presentable, and in a desolate environment, it buys them significant amounts of goodwill and influence despite the cult behavior. In the Northwest Wastes, there's a particular random encounter with a caravan of merchants who will only appear between Mariposa and Lost Hills. Asking this caravan where they're going gets a half answer, but your mind can infer the rest. Given that caravans have gone missing in this exact region of the Wasteland, and you know what's causing it, everyone here seems to be okay. This caravan's blatantly lying about where they're muling medical supplies to. If they're even peddling meds, given some people's penchant for trafficking flesh in the Wasteland, which the Master's army relies upon heavily. This caravan's alliance with the supermutant threat is all but verbally confirmed. Supportive to this, the faction's medical outreach in Necropolis operates with impunity next to a gaggle of supermutants, as if you can't spell progress without the word ogres. The supermutants are the Master's private angels of death. The children of the cathedral have paved a peaceful-looking tarmac in each settlement for the secret army to land. In the original design of Fallout, the hidden time limit was set to have the supermutants slowly overtake all of the Wasteland settlements if the Vault Dweller didn't act quickly enough. With the children of the cathedral acting as peaceful Trojan horses, the Master's plan is laid out well before you ever set foot in Fallout's mid-game areas. Among the other supermutants, Harry's been given explicit directions to take any normals to his lieutenant. The lieutenant himself is called the Right Hand of God, by cultists who literally blow up like blood sausages. The lieutenant calls the Vault Dweller a prime normal. We can infer that this means that having a genetic code like the Vault Dwellers, unbridled by post-apocalyptic mutation and untarnished by residual radioactive decay, is desirable toward the Master's aim. We may never know what that means for the bigger picture, but it recontextualizes Fallout's supermutant ending as having a grander design for the Vault Dweller. In the eyes of the children of the cathedral, destruction is creation. If you care to sell Cathedral Zealot and nostalgic-sounding Jane down a river toward her master's misfortune, you could demonstrate some blind faith to see your attitude polarize from prickly to pleasant. Her words put the rosebed on full display. She'll give the Vault Dweller some exposition about how her church intends to garner the trust of the misguided flock of humanity. The eventual goal for the children is to transmogrify humanity into mutant kind at the behest of what she calls the Holy Flame. The title of Holy Flame belongs to the Master, who was once a man but is now a Cronenberger made of at least one man, an eye stalk, some other biomatter, 3 different voices, and as much recovered and strung together technology within arm's reach of Richard Grey at the time he received his unholy transubstantiation. But the title of Holy Flame is also used in reverence to the world's nuclear reset. Flames signify destruction, but they can also symbolize purification or even rebirth. When Richard Grey was born as the monster, he was cleansed of his human form, destroying his human limitations. His mental capacity grew proportionately, if not exponentially. Grey gained a mental dominion over any living creature that was also exposed to the vats at Mariposa. Once created, each mutant is capable of hearing the Master, joining in what he calls the Unity. The Master believes wholeheartedly that turning all of humanity into supermutants who can receive his mental wavelength, his divine message, will create an apotheosis for human development. A schism before and after mutanthood, but also a way of preventing war from ever happening again by uniting separately subjected minds into one. The Master and everyone who follows him were physically mutated into sometimes brutish, sometimes grotesque, always ugly creatures. Whereas the Holy Flame of the nuclear apocalypse destroyed the old world, the Holy Flame of the new world, of the Master, both cleanses any recognition of humanity from that old world and gives that burn victim a direct communion to the man who became the master of it all. In addition to his public left hand and his private right hand, the Master has 3 individuals caged within. 3 voices inside one abomination of technoflesh. His voices take on explicit personalities that are demonstrated entirely by which voice says which word in the Master's dialogue. Jim Cummings is his own masterclass in lending his voice as the speaker that all 3 personalities defer to. The Master's own voice is his most prominent, used to communicate as well as dole out punishing words.
I don't have to prove anything to you!
The voice is verbatim how God is sometimes described in the Old Testament, a wrathful deity, intolerant of the misbehavior of lesser beings. A synthetic but clearly female voice is used to convey words and ideas that are equally seductive and reluctant.
Do you join the Unity, or do you die here?
Join.
Die!
Join.
Die!
I am no villain.
You have no idea what I or
The Unity
is about.
This vocal tone is used whenever the Master is trying to entice or let down easily. A third voice, one which is digitized and tonally neutral, is used to convey words that would be used to communicate higher-leveled, higher-ordered concepts, ideas that invite transcendence.
And what is that? The unity will bring about the master race.
As a well-designed, well-considered narrative and experiential obstacle, the Master's architecture is all there. But the reason we still talk about the Master today is because of Leonard Boyarsky's gardening skills. In the 2 months leading to Fallout's release, Leonard and lead artist Jason Anderson noticed that a lot of dialogue was missing. Like in all of the Brotherhood of Steel that wasn't a talking heads amount of missing. Jason ended up writing most of the dialogue for the Lost Hills bunker. You can see this with Vree's assistant, Sophia. Attached to Vree's hip, Sophia fills in some of the wider story gaps left over from the Vault Dweller's conversation with the talking head. During this writing process, Jason Anderson also figured out how to cut and splice the voice lines of the Brotherhood's talking heads to synthesize a dialogue that was internally cohesive, but also narratively consistent with the game's central plot. As it turns out, a lot of Fallout was missing dialogue. Fresh off of his honeymoon, Leonard assisted Jason with a lot of crunched writing and rewriting for the entire game. But the Master's dialogue is the smoking gun that shows us that Leonard Boyarsky was a lead narrative writer, wearing the face of Fallout's art director all along.
As long as there are differences, we will tear ourselves apart fighting each other.
Engaging in combat with the Master is certainly a tough way to go about stopping him. Debating him is arguably the best way to beat him. The Master's dialogue battle can go about 7 different ways from Sunday. There are twists and turns to his conversation branches, containing knowledge and skill checks for how well you played. The Master also has a passive debuff that he applies to the Vault Dweller, a psychic power/intimidation factor, which lowers your odds at passing said knowledge and skill checks. When you exchange words instead of firepower, you have to convince the Master that his plan is not godly. True to his once human name, Richard Gray sincerely believes that he's doing what's best for the Wasteland. He's not evil for the sake of being evil. He's evil because he refuses to change his approach. He's an enlightened freak show playing God. He's amassed an army on the threshold of becoming unstoppable. Every human turned super mutant is a loss for humanity and a gain for their progress. He has at least 1 nuclear bomb stockpiled, his ace in the hole should he need it, which the super mutants are resistant to the long-term effects of, should it blow up. To him, history justifies his actions, and his actions aren't half-measured. To borrow from Noah Caldwell Gervais, in order to defeat the Master, you have to be more of a hero than he is the villain. And the dialogue path to victory feels like it's the best avenue for achieving that reality. It feels this way because your rise to herodom proves that, despite appearances, the Master was never a god. He was always a man with good intentions, deceived by his own hubris while operating on a false premise. Your journey, its branching paths full of twists and turns, contained his sublime. When you remind the Master that he's Richard Gray, it's Richard Gray who puts an end to the mask which he sacrificed a lot more than his form to maintain. Defeated by the logic that the reality of his actions can never measure up to the dream he envisioned, Richard Gray sets a generous time limit for the Vault Dweller to escape a self-inflicted nuclear detonation, as he and the byproducts of his dreams are engulfed by the holy flame toward a better reality. When Tim Cain originally thought of what Fallout's villain was going to be, he imagined an antagonist who required the player to use a time machine to defeat them. Whether knowingly or otherwise, his plan came to fruition. Team GURPS did end up creating that villain, and it wasn't the Master. Fallout's true final boss is its narrative outcome. Tim has emphasized before that, if he could, he would make a game featuring a leveling system necessitated by player failure. In other words, the more that the player fails, the more they grow. Experience through failure is much more realistic. The fact that completion of Fallout's quests earns the player the most experience points falls somewhere along the continuum between grinding enemies and leveling up directly from failure. But the true experience gained in Fallout is getting a playthrough to align with its sequel's table setting. Fallout requires a lot of saving. In fact, it has 10 slots dedicated to saving. Each time you make a save, the game expects the player to overwrite the title of their save file. Implicitly, Fallout isn't telling you where to go or what to do by making you title your save files, but it does want you to remember what you did. Mechanically, Fallout's architecture is robust because it lays fertile ground for many different playstyles, but narratively, at least when it concerns a sequel, the game expects a particular set of events to happen. At its least constrained, Fallout wants you to make the legend of the Vault Dweller come true. At its most constrained, Fallout wants you to have a specific first-hand witness. It's no secret how creatures like ghouls, super mutants, and deathclaws nod to forebears like undead, orcs, and dragons. If you ask Harold about the leader of the Circle of Thieves, Loxley, he'll chide about the guy playing at Robin Hood. Vault 13 is named after the most unlucky number in American pop culture, yet the Vault Dweller manages onward, making their own luck. Almost everyone in Shady Sands talks about Dharma, the law of cosmic causality where karmic outcomes match behavioral decisions, right before you get thrown into the morally gray situation of Junktown's debauchery. Necropolis literally means City of the Dead. De facto leader of Necropolis, Set, is named after the Egyptian god of deserts, storms, warfare, and chaos. The Brotherhood of Steel and their Exodus take clear inspiration from the book A Canticle for Leibowitz, if not the Old Testament. The Master was a man-made god, only to be made man again. I can think of a particular story that aligns with that. The legend of the Vault Dweller is full of so many flourishes that accentuate the mythology surrounding it. And all of that, whether true or not, embellished or lost in translation, everything we know about what Fallout 2 mythologizes about the Vault Dweller hinges on Tandy. When it came to lore continuity between Fallout and Fallout 2, Team GURPS kept their cards close to their chests. We know that as early as 6 months before Fallout's release, this is when playtesters were choosing to come in after work during the weekends, and instead of playtesting other games with guaranteed overtime, is when the conversation about a sequel for Fallout began in earnest. 2 months before Fallout released is when that conversation started gaining momentum. That's when Jason Anderson and Leonard Boyarsky were sprinting some of Fallout's most essential and memorable dialogue into existence. Fresh out of that frying pan, they were tasked with making a pitch for Fallout 2, while Tim was putting out the bigger pre-launch fires. Included in this was the implementation of the special system once Interplay put the kibosh on GURPS. 2 other big fires that needed extinguishing were making sure that companions worked the way they currently do, and ameliorating Fallout's 4th possible cancellation, a game-breaking bug that could appear at any moment during a playthrough. Somewhere in between the timeline I've just described, a new team was in the process of designing what would become Fallout 2, using Tim's versatile software. In total, the 6 months leading to Fallout's release, followed by the 3 months before Tim Cain put in his resignation, was the 8 to 9 month overlap between those 2 games. The 3 lead contributors of Fallout 1 I just talked about put a solid chunk of work into its sequel during that overlap, before abandoning Interplay for greener pastures. At this time, I can neither confirm nor deny what was or wasn't fully meant to be considered for a sequel. It's a real ghoul of a situation. But within the plot of Fallout 2 remains the fate of Tandy. In Fallout 2, Tandy becomes the 2nd president of the new California Republic. There's a nice subtlety to how the Brahmin symbolically transmogrifies into the NCR's 2-headed bear. Tandy's one of the biggest connective threads from the first Fallout leading to Fallout 2, outside of maybe Harold or the Crimson Caravan. But for all intents and purposes, Tandy's rise to influence before Fallout 2 isn't believable if left to Fallout's treatment of her without the player's involvement. With the player's least amount of involvement, Tandy gets kidnapped by raiders and then killed, or she gets saved and escorted back to Shady Sands. If she makes it back to Shady Sands, she eventually takes over the NCR, long before the events of Fallout 2, as a sort of stand-in Nepo baby candidate who continues what her father started, but without really any merit. I could buy a more believable sequel backstory for 1 bottle cap. When meeting Tandy, she says that she wants to see the world because Aradesh's helicopter parenting prevents this. She can barely articulate herself when you ask her about anything outside of Shady Sands, or just in general. She has a perspective of a prairie girl from the 1800s. As a character, Tandy proves that she knows dirt about life's many experiences. That's not the kind of upbringing that gets you on one of the franchise's biggest factions' $100 bill, showcasing your character giving a speech that, considering the crowd's volume, is in league with a civil rights movement speech. The pre-war $100 bill had Ben Franklin on it, a man who literally caught lightning. Tandy couldn't catch a $10 word if it landed on her tongue. In Fallout, if you take Tandy back home right away, her future in Fallout 2 writes a check that her present experiences can't cash. It's an unsatisfactory transition to leadership for me, and I believe Tim Cain and all of Team GURPS. I say this because there's an entirely different way that Fallout can be played that gives Tandy a believable hero's journey. When the players rescued Tandy, the obvious goal is to get her back to Aradesh right away, to get some juicy experience toward that next level. But what if the player chooses to not bring her back right away? What if the player, what if I, decide that, knowing what I know about her role in Fallout 2, such a fate needs to feel earned? Well, I can choose to not take her back to Shady Sands, until I decide that she's learned enough to lead one of the most powerful factions of the Fallout series' future. Am I giving away some desirable experience to do this? Sure. if you want to look at it that way. Is Rad Scorpion anti-venom needless if you're using it incorrectly? To me, I'm not sacrificing my experience. I'm betting my experience on the next generation. I'm trading my experience now for Tandy's growth later. What we are about to embark on is the playstyle that makes Tandy the leader that the New California Republic deserves. Notarized into fate by the Vault Dweller, welcome to what I call the Rise Up, Madam President throughline. A second playthrough starts with a solid reminder that I don't want to stumble into the city of the dead, only to find actual dead people. Fun fact, I still end up flubbing this section on a second go despite preparing for it. But that's why we have our trusty time machine. Back-to-back playthroughs make Fallout an adventure game masquerading as a survival RPG. It reminds you that a mistake doesn't have to remain a mistake if you learn from it. In this lens, a mistake can transcend into a trick. Adventure games are all about knowing their tricks, and Fallout is no different. If you know its tricks, you can bend and sometimes even break the Wasteland as you see fit. Why else give the game a parsing feature? To a first-time player, poison is a do-nothing stat and antidotes are do-nothing remedies. To a second-time player, selling an antidote does something. It generates 25 bottle caps, 50 if you've learned the barter trait. This trick boosts early game purchasing power. Consecutive playthroughs also build upon your existing knowledge in such a way that theories about what you can potentially get away with become realities you didn't know could happen with 100% certainty. Without searching it on the internet, the hypothesis that guided my second playthrough was, can Tandy help defeat the Master and be returned back to Shady Sands before finishing Fallout? To balance out my character on a second playthrough, I dropped my charisma stat like a bad habit. Agility, strength, and intelligence had to receive the most love if I wanted to smash hulks and outwit God with Madam President-to-be by my side. In Fallout, there are several opportunities to increase your special attributes outside of character creation and drug use. I consider the Brotherhood surgery method to be too much of a deadline-shattering time suck, so I avoid it. But during a first playthrough, I learned that there are 3 special points that you can rebate from the character creation screen if you know where to look in the Wasteland. Patrick the Celt is a wandering NPC. He's a random friendly encounter that you roll for whenever you enter mountain tiles on the world map. With a high enough speech skill, you can get him to permanently increase your charisma by 1. In Adatum, you can take advantage of a bug where a mystical NPC named Chuck will give you the Fool Tarot card reading twice, permanently increasing the Vault Dweller's luck by 2. These exploits can give you a huge advantage for the next playthrough. Mistakes from that first playthrough help with optimizing for efficiency so that you get the most amount of experience while using the least amount of time during the second playthrough. After a first playthrough, I knew I could take care of the Rad Scorpions, barter for a rope, and save Tandy, all before ever entering Vault 15. Assuming I killed all of the rats at the beginning of the game, reaching Vault 15's destroyed command center will garner at least 2 levels of experience, while saving 7 days of travel time on the timer. That temporal shaving acts like a mid-game mistake coupon that's redeemable for when I want to attempt getting one of Fallout's trickier endings, saving Necropolis. Knowing how to source time this way can be a cog in the wheel spinning toward the Rise Up Madam President outcome, but more amplified. In a Rise Up Madam President playthrough, I killed the rats. I found the rope instead of bartering for it. I bought Ian's loyalty. I killed 2 Rad Scorpions. I forged an antidote. I forgot to put that antidote into a sick man. I went back to the cave and killed all but 2 Rad Scorpions. I blew up the cave to gain more experience. I taught crop rotation to a peasant. I did not save Tandy. Yet, the Pugilist build is a grower long before it Super Saiyans into a shower. Tandy can wait. I explored Vault 15, finding extra trinkets to sell, but also a discoverable armor upgrade with a function that makes a dog with the fierceness of Cerberus pathfind me instantly. Granted, having to go to Junktown before going back for Tandy didn't save me time, but during my first playthrough, I burned 15 days total through my initial blunders. The legendary second playthrough got me nearly double the experience in less than half of the time spent. This meant I could go down to Junktown, help win a mayoral election, recruit 2 more companions to our fellowship, and still be tied with the first playthrough and the time burnt to get back to Tandy. Cash in that Destiny coupon, false facing as a mistake coupon, grab my entire thesis statement, and get out of Dodge with virtually no time wasted. In addition to Ian and Dogmeat, Tycho should be in our party at least until the Master is defeated. So we grabbed him as well, before rescuing our Wasteland princess. As I said earlier, Tycho's recruitment is narratively aligned with doing the right thing. Whether you want him alive beyond that depends on how vital his longevity contributes to your vision of the NCR, eventually absorbing the Desert Rangers into their ranks. My vision certainly finishes the job. For the sake of Fallout's time limits, everything from Tandy onward should be as finished as possible before entering the hub, Fallout's best developed area and launchpad into the game's second act. The hub oversatisfies as a location from the Junktown's amount of attention that it received during development. The hub has 4 distinct districts, each behaving as its own microclimate of mercantile, quest-accepting, quest-completing, and lore-expository dialogue opportunities. Waterchip anchored to the ship you call your mind, a first playthrough is about sleuthing information, and the hub provides an opportunity to really make that happen. It contains all sorts of characters, from ruffians associated with depravity to the career criminals in leather jackets on the opposite side of town, with the merchants lying at the heart of it all. At the cost of time, you can take on caravan guard jobs to secure some extra cheese. I didn't want to chance the caravans on my first playthrough, believing that there were far better options than wasting several days working for peanuts and lower experience points. I happened to be right in this case. There were far more lucrative ways to make money in this town without wasting more time than necessary. The hub commands a player's knowledge of Fallout's economic system with its myriad of sinks and sources, just as much as it guides the player with the main objective of looking for a new water chip for Vault 13. Mastering the hub is essential for the Rise Up, Madam President throughline. You'll want to figure out how to complete as many of the settlement's quests as possible, while also using the spoils gained from those quests to trade up to the best equipment and weapons the area has to offer at this stage in the game. The hub tests all of your resourcefulness. Passing that test means giving yourself enough money to shift the pendulum of ferocity in the Vault Dweller's direction for the game's impending difficult barriers. In short, the hub has the Vault Dweller capitalizing on its ups and surviving its downs. In long, that means figuring out who sells what, using this to your advantage, and eventually trading your way up to the best armor and weapons, ideally with a surplus of caps in your pocket. On a second playthrough with a character who's much better at hand-to-hand combat, and who mostly lacks charisma, getting good at the economy becomes the toughest challenge to overcome in the hub. No charisma means prices are always higher, sometimes exorbitant. With its side quests being huge sources of both experience and caps, a seasoned player stands to gain how to best game the system within the hub in the least amount of time. The hub becomes a fun zone once you've learned the tier of difficulty that each side quest serves to treat the unsuspecting. Additionally, the hub provides more than its fair share of mistake coupons ready to be printed if the Vault Dweller is preventative about mitigating its deeper time wounds inflicted from the first playthrough. Symptomatic of being a late implementation during Fallout's development, companions, as far as anyone knows, don't level up. Or so the legend goes. There are workarounds to this. Mastery of the hub will land the Vault Dweller in front of Ian's best weapon, the 223 pistol, the Blade Runner gun. It'll also lead the player to Tycho's best weapon, the sniper rifle, standard issue for a Desert Ranger, built to kill a lot of people. In a playthrough that prioritizes as a leadership workshop for Tandy, there's a certain amount of attention to be paid to the pulse of the entire 5-man party to keep everyone alive, but especially her. I'd liken it to getting the podunk character in a Fire Emblem game. The character is intentionally bad for the first 10 levels until they're not, and they start developing as powerhouses. Tandy is not this particular journey, but she is this particular destination, as far as the Zero to Hero narrative is concerned. Instead, it's the Vault Dweller and the party who takes on Tandy's journey, which involves a lot of her protection, a lot of get down, Madam President. Tandy, armed with nothing more than a used butter knife she clumsily put in her pocket before departing the only world she's ever known called home the day she was kidnapped, is a downbeat, easily beat neck of a 16-year-old when the player finds her. In battle, she whines, "I don't want to do this!" as if the Vault Dweller has a gun to her head when she's knifing chuckleheads. Like Katya, Tandy will miss attacks pretty frequently. Attacks that do land will get no more than 2 damage points. But, over time, you can see tangible growth in legendary proportions. Toward the end of my Madam President run, Tandy started doing 12 to 13 damage points for hits that connected, on death claws. I won't discount her high luck stat. Concerning all companions, Tandy's Lady Luck, sitting comfortably on her throne of 8 points, 3 higher than the next companion. Seeing 2 consecutive critical successes from her feels about as statistically possible as the Vault Dweller flubbing 2 consecutive hits with a 95% success rate back to back. But then Tandy literally starts yelling at Deathclaws that she's going to turn them into paste. And well, at the very least, I'm sold on the illusion that the Vault Dweller's guidance is the cause. In my battle with the one behemoth to rule them all, Tandy delivered the coup de grace, shattering Harry's elbow for 14 hit points, slaying the beast in utter disgrace. She made sure to yell her battle cry over his incredibly limp Hulk figure. "I don't want to do this." Fallout's level cap is at 21, but you shouldn't waste the amount of real-world time it takes to achieve that unless you're going for 100% completion. Level progression in a standard playthrough caps at around 12 to 13 when completing all available quests. In a normal run, this is enough to get by and beat the game. For a run that teaches Tandy how to kill God and rise in his place for dominion over the Wasteland, this is unacceptable. Without going the legendary distance, Your team of warriors just can't match God's pet Hydra. So, you have to improvise. At the Boneyard, there's a settlement-spanning quest that asks the player to get rid of its Deathclaw infestation. Here, the player can fight up to 3 Deathclaws above ground, and venture deeper into the warehouse's basement to destroy the cause, the Deathclaw Mother, alongside her rotating supply of incubating eggs. If you kill the Deathclaw Mother, the infestation will be cleared, never to return again. However, if you don't kill the Mother, and you're not shy about resource-intense grinding, you can establish a makeshift Deathclaw glue factory in order to farm 1,000 to 3,000 experience points every 6 in-game hours. Once an unarmed combat specialist reaches level 18, they get their best perk for the build, the Slayer perk. This is the sign to stop farming. Clocking in at around 9 to 10 hours total and involving a mid-farm excursion to raid the glow for precious resources, the team that is well fed on the Deathclaw diet, even using the glow like a grocery store visit, is about as lore accurate to the strike force capable of putting an end to the Master with Tandy in the party. The most time-intensive way of defeating the Master is also the most climactic way of defeating him. Hidden behind BFG wielding waves of Hulk is a separate elevator that leads to the King of Monsters Godzilla factory and contingency plan, a nuclear bomb. Assuming that you can get past the Hydra, the door that leads to the secret elevator requires a lockpicking skill of at least 70. Arming the bomb also requires a science skill of at least 70. In other words, in order to disrespect the Master and his forces like this, you don't just have to be more the hero than the Master is the villain. You have to outfox him, while matching his omnipresence, omnipotence, and omniscience. This is the legend of the Vault Dweller made true by my actions. Lobbied by my imagination, this is also how I choose Tandy's personal development happened. Canonically, it's stated that Fallout ends after Mariposa is destroyed. This also makes my fellowship's disbanding as a sort of on-the-way farewell tour. The Master outmatched, Tandy was returned to Shady Sands.
Oh, that was great! Action, adventure! Anyway, if there's anything that I can do for you, you just ask.
She would go on to become the second president of the new California Republic. We also left Tycho there too, because it just makes sense. Fallout's incompleteness leads to many narrative outcomes that are impossible to achieve despite their win conditions. For example, the followers of the apocalypse always end up eradicated in spite of the fact that they appear in later games. The positive win condition for the followers was to find a spy within their ranks and snuff the infiltrator out. Like some of the less polished parts of the game, this quest has a beginning but no end. The hub suffers from the same fate. No matter what you do, the hub gets invaded by super mutants and you cannot save the settlement. Like the followers, the existence of the Crimson Caravan, a faction from the hub, outlived its bugged fate from Fallout in later games, disproving the game's outcome for the hub as well. Tandy has a greater purpose for the Wasteland in Fallout 2, but there just wasn't enough time to iron it into existence in Fallout. Reinforced by the premise of Fallout 2, this doesn't diminish the fact that you can partake in this collaborative gardening between developer and player in Fallout. That, for the span of tens of hours, you can partake in cultivating your own creative force into the destiny forged by the Vault Dweller. Fallout released to instant success with little to no marketing effort. In hindsight, that's why it succeeded. Little to no love and attention from the company meant more creative control. Having a leader like Tim Cain acting as liaison between his team and Interplay is a dynamic that cannot be understated for accomplishing this feat. The difference between a boss and a leader is that a leader won't ask their subordinates to do anything that they're not willing to do themselves. A leader also takes the time to understand their employees' thresholds, likes, and dislikes in order to effectively guide a project toward completion. Tim was a teammate before he was ever a boss. When it came time to delegate and demand, he was nothing short of well pragmatized and fair. Ultimately, the fourth almost cancellation of Fallout, that game-breaking bug I mentioned earlier, was the reason the game didn't ship on time. The philosophy guiding this was to ship a game that was finished but not polished, as opposed to shipping a game that was unplayable. For months, Tim and contractor Mark Harrison worked tirelessly to find and fix this bug by initiating and calibrating what Mark called a bear trap. In layman's terms, think of it like a bracket that you adjust closer, little by little, through guess and check. Each time the game crashes, you know to close the bracket more until you eventually arrive at the cause of the problem. Someone had made an innocent error, making a less than equal sign instead of a less than sign in a for loop. As I understand it, this led to memory overwriting each time the game booted up, and the chaos ensued. After the bear was successfully trapped, Tim was asked by leadership who was responsible for causing it, but not wanting direct repercussions for that person, Tim took full responsibility for the bug. After Fallout's success, when it came time for bonuses, Tim's initial distribution proposal as project lead was discarded without his knowledge. His bonus was severely lowered from top of the list to its bottom third. When asked why his bonus was lowered, Brian Fargo replied that since Tim took responsibility for the crash bug, he would earn a bonus to match his blunder. Combined with what can only be summarized as a loss of passion, patience, and the creative control he once had over the guidance of Fallout, Tim Cain drafted his resignation. He submitted it 2 weeks later. He would leave Interplay in early 1998. In the words of the overseer, "I'm sorry, you're a hero, and you have to leave." Luckily, 2 people would follow him out the door, Leonard Boyarsky and Jason Anderson. The Trinity would go on to own and operate Troika Games, to continue their separately unified creative force. I think it's fitting that one of the last features programmed into Fallout 2, when these 3 were still around, was being able to command other people to get out of your way. Fallout is a game that commands attention as equally as it captures it. In terms of team, budget, and scope, it had such a Goldilocks zone's germination to its creative process. It had a teammate disguised as a producer and lead programmer. It had 2 lead artists moonlighting as its freeform narrative writers, with one of those writers creating one of the most memorable final boss battles ever. The development of Fallout had a spirit that outmatched what was expected of it, and everyone was blown away despite the odds. That's true grit. And after all, true grit is what gets you talked about in this wasteland we call a world. If you think I wasn't going to talk about this game's manual before letting you go, I'm happy to surprise you. Last time I talked about reading a 30-something page novella backstory. Fallout's manual could be used to lecture a university class for at least 1 semester. Seriously. There's an opening 5.5 pages long talking about nuclear explosion and radiation physics. The art team made a Tim Cain version of Vault Boy, next to some actual commemorative post-apocalyptic recipes. One of Tim's favorite methods of encouraging his employees to calibrate with him was by making cinnamon bread, showing up to the office early, and giving out slices to whoever wanted to stop in to chat. Better to catch flies with honey, they say. You can really feel the playfulness and passion that went into this game by just paging through the Vault Dweller's survival guide. It's great to see the Vault Boy being used as a visual aid too. Don't lose your hands there, Johnny. I think it was about 48 hours before this 121-page manual was about to be printed en masse. That's when Leonard Boyarsky looked it over and saw that there was a blank page near the manual's back cover. To Leonard, this was unacceptable. 24 hours before submitting the manual for the printers, Leonard grabbed Jason Anderson, and the 2 got together and drew up a zany ad to fit in with the manual's tone. The idea for the ad was meant as more of a joke, but a seed was planted. Now filled, that once blank page would create its own legacy, featuring a plot device called the Garden of Eden Creation Kit, to be continued in the next saga. Hey, so that was pretty fun, right? I had a great time making this video. And life hasn't been the easiest right now, so this has kind of been my escape, and it's been a lot of fun making this. It's gotten me out of that funk, or it's kind of helped me work through that funk, so to speak. So if you made it this far, sincerely, thank you so much for watching. This video was brought to you entirely by me. So if you feel inclined, definitely check out my Patreon. I would love to make more content like this, and I aim to do that with the help of your support. Other than that, hopefully some more videos on the way, sooner rather than later this time around. And, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, I hope you're doing well. And if not, be well.